quantum advantage. But I think that with that power, we should be able to, I think, finally see, as you know, with the system we have now, they're usable, but they're kind of toy systems. They don't do anything more than a traditional computer. I think once you get to that scale, you start to be able to answering problems that aren't capable to be answered now on a classical computer within a time frame that's relevant. Now, what those problems are, they're probably very. I'm not sure what they're going to be, because people are doing this active research and seeing exactly what the quantum system will answer. But I know one, for example, will be the ability to do really highly detailed chemical calculations, quantum chemical calculations of an accuracy that's beyond what's possible now. So we'll understand the properties of molecules, which should lead to breakthroughs in materials discovery, for example.
Well, it's certainly an exciting time. So, and maybe Chris, just to ask you a little bit about this as well. It's you write a lot about technology and what it means, and particularly in the context of Ireland, because we have a very strong research system here in Ireland. But how do you think Ireland can play or operate or even lead in some of these domains?
Right, Kieran, I thought it was a wonderful presentation and great overview of what's happening in the country. So thank you very much for that. I think one of the chief challenges that the computing fraternity face is, in the widest possible sense, the human-computer interface. You alluded to that in different ways, but right now the internet is full of the announcements around the metaverse and the bringing together of our physical reality with virtual reality, augmented reality. And that's one example of the human-computer interface and how computers may augment and guide us in the future. But you also touched on it with neuromorphic computing, and maybe we can come back to that with sort of embedded AI and biocomputing and the actual embedding of computing technology inside our bodies and inside our brains. But I think one of the biggest areas, and you did touch on this, is around trust. And I think as we look to apply advanced computing techniques and technology into areas like government and administration and business, the question is, for any government administrator, politician, senior business person, is, can I trust the computer? Can I trust the advice that it's giving me? How do I know it's safe? So that issue around safety of the judgments and of the results, the answer is 42. How do we get the computer to explain that in ways which are actionable and give guidance to policymakers, to administrators, to decision makers who are acting on behalf of society at large, whether that be government or that be business. So I think in the widest possible sense that human-computer interface is the area which needs considerable development. And I think if you look at what's happening here in Ireland, you've touched on a number of projects which are already working in that area, but getting the trust of not just society, but also policymakers, administrators, business makers is a really interesting area, and one that I think needs a lot of attention for computers to really address societal issues. And you perhaps address that in your final slide, the involvement of the planet. So you have to get the planet to understand and trust and work with machines in a way that's synergistic.
So I would argue that in Ireland we have an advantage in the sense that because we're small and interconnected, there's small degrees of separation between the researchers and the policymakers and the politicians at different levels, that this positions Ireland kind of to take a leadership position in showing how this can be done. It'd be good to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, because the connectivity, I think, between researchers, industry, public at large, society is quite tight. And also, I think Ireland demographically is no longer a monocultural society, which it might have been if you're going back a few decades, but now is very varied in its culture. And that also plays a really important role in terms of handling any potential bias and around societal values. So I think absolutely Ireland is a wonderful, I hesitate to use the word sandpit, but in a way it is, playground in which one can explore these areas in a way that can rapidly deliver results and feedback for the system and improve the system.
Right, thank you, Chris. And maybe just to bring Michael in here again for a second. So, Michael, what I want to talk about as well is, with these, with the power of this computing now, if we can get it to be trusted, etc. But there is that, I suppose, there's two elements to it. There's trust in the society, and then there's that scientific acceleration. So, with this technology that we're unlocking, with this power, how do you see it being used to accelerate scientific discovery, both short, medium, long term?
Yeah, I think this is one of the key ways in which these future computing technologies will come together to do something that we haven't done before, which is really to embed the scientific process in many different domains. For example, we've been using it ourselves in IBM to bring together disparate technologies across these bits, qubits, to discover new sustainable molecules for semiconductors. So this allowed us, through the hybrid cloud, to bring all this technology together, to use the AI, and we were able to do something that previously would have taken, I don't know, usually it takes, say, 10 years and $100 million to discover a new molecule. We did this in 1 year, all the way to the synthesis of the new candidates. So I think that just shows, like, when you bring it together, what you can do, how you can accelerate discovery in one particular domain. And then the next steps is to see how we can bring that to new domains, right? Something outside materials discovery, how we can bring it to health, how we can bring it to, you were alluding to, like, can we use it for government policy? And I think this is going to be very exciting. The key thing there that we're working on is how we can develop a single platform that we can use, so we can have one single place to capture the knowledge in many different domains and bring all those kind of fundamental layers that everybody needs to build on to do this accelerated discovery process. That's the key challenge, I think, there.
Okay, thank you very much for that one. So I want to bring Ruth in at this point as well, just to talk a little bit about, when we do have this accelerated discovery. So an interesting part of what's going on in the system at the moment is, I know of groups of researchers and actually bodies as well who are looking at this scientific knowledge that's out there, all these data points that are created, and they're trying to see how we can get that transdisciplinary element of research in there, but also doing it in a sort of in new ways. So, I know the projects there say that, humans can't keep up with the amount of information that we are generating on a day-to-day basis. Transdisciplinary means that we can start to bring social science into the physics and the chemistry and other elements and engineering that we're doing. Just get your thoughts on, so if we can accelerate the scientific discovery, how do we accelerate it in a way that we bring that transdisciplinary element in there and keep it fair, trustworthy, unbiased, etc.?
I mean, it's a big question, and I'd fully echo all the discussion we've had so far. It's been really interesting, and I think it's, if we reflect on the last couple of years and the urgency that was in place around developing COVID-19 vaccines and kind of communities brought together to work on that, it kind of shows you what's possible when you have that focus between broad groups of people working together, and I think, if you're on the optimistic side from your early slides about the potential for computers to really help us with some of these really big problems that we have, then not only do we have to get people working together and bring all of that knowledge together, we have to also have a sense of urgency about this. And I think sometimes when you're focused on the technological development side and maybe not on the problem you're trying to solve, you can lose that sense of urgency sometimes. So in Science Foundation Ireland, I mean, you mentioned some of them on the slides, we've been using this model of challenge-based funding. So we're bringing teams together from different disciplines, and I think in the first time for us also bringing non-researchers onto the research team. So we call them societal champions, but they are essentially the voice on the team which constantly reminds the team of the purpose of what they are trying to do. And we set up that funding with very tight timelines, and of course we have a lot of go, no-go points where people just fail fast and don't go ahead if we feel they're not going to hit that target. So that's a way for us as I suppose a government body to focus on a sort of solution mindset in terms of research rather than that technology push. So again, I would echo, it is that bringing together of those different stakeholders, but the urgency has to be there as well, particularly when we look at the challenges coming down the road at us.
So how do you take that model, which you're using in challenge-based funding, it's quite specific at specific teams, and extend that into a broader engagement with society in terms of their aspects or what they see as important and how they want to be involved in the technology that they're developing?
I mean, I think as the research community, and I suppose that's where you and I kind of spend our time, we need to get better at having those conversations earlier. Because I think you raised a lot of questions, ethical questions in your slide. And again, the issues of trust, it's good that we know that they're broken, and it's good that we know that there are ethical challenges coming down the road with AI. But I think the question is, are those conversations still quite niche? I would argue that they are. And I think if you talk to the average person in the street, they wouldn't have a huge sense that they have a voice in how they might influence those technologies to progress. And I often use the example, my background, I feel like a bit of an imposter here. I'm a geneticist, so I'm not a physicist or a computer scientist. And maybe that's why I can be sensitive on this topic, because if you look back to not that long ago, the mid-90s, when commercial traffic was first allowed on the internet, that was around the time the first commercially available genetically modified crops hit the market. And if we think about the public's interaction with those two technologies, they had a pretty visceral reaction against genetically modified crops. And in fact, what we can see is that technology really slowed down over the last couple of decades. Now, in contrast, when we look at kind of born on the internet companies and the massive growth that we've seen there, really those technologies were welcomed with open arms into our homes and our pockets, really before we thought very much about the implications of them. So I very much come from a place where we should learn those lessons, and that means it's great for us to have these conversations, and it's great that IBM is precipitating it here, but we need to kind of break out of the industries, the research labs, and have them more broadly. And as you mentioned, we're very much involved in campaigns like that now to bring those conversations into a broader base than maybe just those that kind of go to conferences like this and read the technology pages of the paper.
So can I give you an opportunity to talk about creating our future very quickly?
You can. Thank you. So Creating Our Future is a government campaign, and it's all about breaking down those barriers and having members of the public talk to researchers, hear more about what they're doing, and allow researchers to open the door and, I suppose, investigate their ideas with the public. We're hoping to capture over 10,000 ideas from the public, also on areas of opportunity. So what are the things that matter to them? What are the things that they're curious about? Where do they feel researchers need to be focusing? What are the issues that they want solved? So, we really want to have lots of open conversations, and there's going to be hundreds of events allowing those conversations to happen, both virtually and in person. And we'd certainly encourage everyone who's here today to log on to creatingourfuture.ie and, get your ideas into us. They're all going to go to government. They'll all be read. There'll be a book of inspiration for researchers.
Thanks, Ruth. Okay, I want to bring maybe a few panel members back in together on the next part of the discussion and just talk a little bit about, so we have this power coming our way. In science in Ireland, when we look back over the last couple of years, we've funded something in the region of just shy of 500 million euros worth of investment in the future of computing. So the question then to panel members, and I'll start with you, Kristen, if you want to start the conversation going, is, so where should that focus be? What are the big challenges and the big areas for Ireland, for the globe, that we should be focusing that scientific acceleration and discovery on? Where should we focus our time and energy?
There's so many grand challenges that the planet faces, and I guess the obvious one is climate change and health. So there's probably no surprises to say that, but I think the issue is, we've touched on it, is urgency. It's not a matter of the fact that we can sort of sit back and slowly explore these issues. Climate change is real. It's happening now. If you look at Ireland just geographically, one of the biggest dangers we probably face is on flooding and flood risk from sea level rises. Much of Dublin could be underwater in the not too distant future unless we begin to take action now. And COVID's been a wake-up call for all of us, and I'm sure, unfortunately, it's not going to be the last major health crisis that we face as a species. So there are major challenges, but also the clock is ticking, and so we need action, and we need to see effects and impacts on the ground. And as Michael has alluded to, science is the application of science to solve some of these real-world problems, but to do so efficiently and pragmatically is really key.
Yeah, I think just to go on the urgency, because I think the urgency is already there. We see these things like climate change. We've experienced COVID for the last year and a half. That's really kind of catalyzed this sense, like, what can we do to have better control about what's happening? And I think grand challenges are going to keep on coming. If we start and we make a huge effort just for one, it can't just be siloed for one. We need to have that kind of fundamental layer that allows us to answer all the new challenges that we haven't seen yet, which are no doubt coming. And I think that one of the things that we see is that, right now we kind of consume technology quite passively in a quite siloed way. We're just carried along by the flow of what technology can do and what it can do for us. I think the real change there is to change that. So how do we become more dynamic and collaborative? And Ruth was talking about with like the outreach to the community. And I think it's building those communities, like we call them communities of discovery, are really key. So when we think about the science method, it's about like what is science built on? It's about like coordinated collaboration and knowledge that can circulate around. So we kind of have to break out of our silos and look at new ways of collaborating. So instead of just looking as an institution at certain things, we can look at how can we engage in partnerships with other institutions, or how can we open, how can we let that data flow? And similarly in academia, instead of just thinking like have a linear flow, I have some breakthrough in a group, I commercialize it, bring it to business, how can we have a more circular flow? So how can things from business feed back into academia? And of course, changing that is the real challenge. Like, how do we change people? Right? It's great to think about it. It wouldn't be great if everybody let this knowledge flow around. It'd be super. But there's real challenges there. I think at the global level, you need to have these structures in place, to support this kind of mass participation. And I think there it's key to have that public support, the transparency about what's happening, so people understand how decisions are made, the strong partnerships. And then on the individual side, I think that the thing is to overcome that sense of risk that these communities, people think if I participate, maybe I'm giving stuff up, maybe I'm giving an advantage up. But really, these communities are about risk sharing, right? So share risk amongst your partners, and then a realization that you can't answer these challenges, and you actually can't be even competitive in business without leveraging the knowledge that are in these communities. So it's kind of enlightened self-interest also plays a role there.
Yeah, and I think just to come in, this interconnectedness piece is of course, it's obvious now. And of course, that's where the problems get thorny. And again, if we take maybe COVID and climate change as two big challenges that we've been facing over the last couple of years, there's been things there that we've wanted to do, to try and improve the COVID situation, which maybe are having a negative impact on sort of climate change. So I think all of these are going to be interconnected challenges, and that's again where the potential for things like advanced AI could come in to help us understand, all of those associated effects with action that we take. And I would also echo Michael's point about collaboration, and you touched on it too, Karen, with government. And again, we've run a scheme where we've been embedding researchers in government departments because I think there is an appetite there from government to be more involved in technology development so they can be more prepared both to leverage new technology in terms of providing us with better public service and governance, but also to maybe be a little bit less risk averse, because I think when something comes packaged to your door and it's new, sometimes the lowest risk thing is just to say, well, I'm not going to have that or do that. Whereas at least if you feel like you've been part of the conversation and the journey, maybe we can all help to build, as you say, that government is a really important part of those communities of discovery, actually.
So then let me ask a provocative line of questioning maybe on this one, which is, so we talk about the need to do this, and I think we're all agreeing violently, which is great. Whose job is it to make sure that happens? Right. So is the onus on business to say, right, we're doing a lot of this stuff, we're going to benefit from it, so it should be us? Is it on academia because we're leading the way? Is it on government because that's government's job to represent people? And whose job is it to pull this together and make this communities of practice happen, to make this communities of discovery a reality?
I think if everybody looks to the other partner for a leader, then you just get this standoff where nobody does anything. And I think this is the type where each individual kind of pillar or stakeholder has to take some ownership and go, okay, let's this is what we're going to do, right? Not looking for somebody else to engage it. But I think in each of those pillars there is different actions people can take. For example, I think in we all want systems that guarantee things like privacy and security and transparency and trustworthy, and that they're fair and equitable. And I think, for example, government's role there is to promote the idea that we should infuse privacy, security, and ethical considerations into the technical development from the start. Like that's something that we should do.
And do you don't think that's going to cause a risk of, like, I'm being provocative deliberately? Are we going to slow down progress? Is that what we're going to do? Put in so many regulations and make progress slower?
Well, I think what we've seen in the past is, I guess this has to do with how we apply regulations, how we develop them. So I think there was a fact that, previously in the US, like 75% of the regulations ever made were never reviewed or never looked at again. They just stand there. They're never changed to the situation, the new situations. And I think there we need to it comes down to what's the best way to evolve things, and that really then comes to the scientific method. That's the best way we have to try again, fail better, and we should really apply that to regulation so that it's evolving via the best practice that we have in response to also technology developments that are happening, also what we want to happen. So yeah, maybe it might be a bit slow, but it shouldn't be super slow, right? And it all depends where you want to get to in the end.
But I think, Michael and Ireland, maybe to come back to government, I mean, we have developed a methodology here, and Professor Jane Souter in DCU, around citizens' assemblies. And I think, before we ran some of those citizens' assemblies, there was definitely a view that these were complex topics that were very challenging. The idea of bringing hundreds of people into a room and having a kind of deliberative discourse and discussion and coming out with something sensible in a challenging technical area. Maybe a lot of people didn't think that would work, and it has worked well here in Ireland. And again, I think the interconnectedness and the small size, there's not that many degrees of separation between people here. I mean, I personally think that is a methodology that we should start using far more extensively. And I think that kind of structure could be put in place here in Ireland, where in fact when we look a lot of way, and you could sort of take regulation in different areas. So you're looking at health, you're looking at AI, you're looking at maybe reviews in justice, those kind of things. And I think our citizens' assembly model is a good one to set up, and I think they should almost be running all the time with different panels of citizens, because I think that's a good way to get everyone involved.
If I could come in, Kieran, you mentioned sort of three actors, which was, I think, government, academic research, and business. But I think sometimes in Ireland we forget this, but there's a fourth actor, which at a geopolitical level we should really be aware of. And that, frankly, and I hate to be controversial, is the military. And I think a lot of the advances in computing and technology generally is driven by military applications. And we shouldn't forget that, and that's still happening. An obvious example is human augmentation. So we may see technology that actually is inside the human body that makes military applications, soldiers more effective on the ground, or pilots more effective, naval operators more effective. And if you can imagine, if you're just a frontline soldier and your commander comes down and says, look, we're going to inject you with this, you can't refuse. and so there'll almost be that, certainly in some societies, that there'll be a force-fed augmentation of the human body for military applications. The obvious question is then, what happens once those particular soldiers are decommissioned and leave the army and go on to leave the rest of their lives? And they've still got this augmentation capability inside their body, which other people in society don't. So I think the military is a fourth player here, and we shouldn't forget it. And it's incredibly powerful at the geopolitical level. And I think in Ireland, we sometimes overlook that. And I don't think we should. I'm not sure how we react to it, but we may find that technology gets adopted by the military in ways that we can't control. But it is happening at the geopolitical level. So I just want to point out there is a fourth player here. Let's not forget about it.
It's a very interesting fourth player that you bring up there, actually. Now, while we don't have a DARPA, and undoubtedly DARPA has been really successsul in the US model and added in a lot of new technologies and capabilities, but maybe, Ruth, something you want to talk about is the way challenges can be done collaboratively that way.
In terms of the military particularly, or just the model that DARPA uses?
Well, the military in particular, and in Ireland, how we could combine forces there too.
Yeah. So of course we are currently working with the defence forces, and I mean, we've had an interesting relationship with them over the past while, because they have some very particular technical challenges, particularly actually related to their work in terms of refugees in the Mediterranean, around boat maneuver, and I suppose the military here, as you say, that we don't have a kind of ARPA-like activity, so they came to Science Foundation Ireland and said, look, these are particular technical challenges that we need to solve. So in terms of that work with us, they've kind of been very open. They've described the issues, and we have teams of researchers who are going to try and solve them. So I suppose that's the more Solve for X challenge funding. But again, it is that piece where they are doing it very openly. I mean, I think, Chris, a lot of what you're talking about is not necessarily stuff that's going to be done in the public domain in the same way we would do it here. And I think that's the challenging piece. And I suppose I will continue to bang that drum. And I suppose it's why I'm so passionate about public funding of research, because, you know, we need to make sure that whatever is going on in behind closed doors, wherever those closed doors are, that we have at least some counterbalance in publicly funded research, because we need to have people who work for us as the general public who can at least comment on, be aware of, know what's happening, and can actually help parse those discussions back with us. So, you know, from my perspective, publicly funded research is an essential bridge to the public between research behind closed doors and what we are, our voice in terms of that technology development.
Yeah, Ruth, I totally agree, because the ability to have, in order to address these future scenarios, whatever they are, we need to be able to predict them, because that's essential for guiding, like having an effective response and ensuring we're prepared for whatever they are. And that requires that things are open and we promote that open engagement.
Okay, so then, you know, is this a strategic advantage for Ireland? So suppose then we do join it all up, we join all the various stakeholders up, all actors are involved, and maybe this is more for Chris and for Michael. You know, is this something that would be an attractor to industry rather than anything else? You know, that there is a regulatory framework in here, there is a sort of a focus on trusted AI, there is an environment whereby this will attract entrepreneurs who want to do new companies in here because they know they're working in a base where it gives them credibility internationally if they grow, and it attracts foreign direct investment as well because of that framework that they can then take elsewhere.
I definitely think so, because the country is relatively small geographically and in population terms, that it becomes relatively easy to experiment with new technologies, new business models, new ways of doing things. So rather than perhaps launch a product into a market where you've got 60, 100, 200 million consumers, launching a product into a place where you've got 3 or 4 million, and getting valuable feedback on that is really advantageous to Ireland, particularly if you've got a government that will support experimentation with new technologies in ways which are safe and add value to society. So I think absolutely our cohesiveness as a society, our openness from government, and our relatively small size are really important and critical differences.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a huge opportunity here, because we already have a basis, as Ruth said, in the public engagement. I think if we have a framework in place that encourages, Ireland is a place where you can do accelerated discovery. We've put these initiatives in place in government and business academia to foster this. People will come here to try it, and if it fulfills its promise, then Ireland becomes an exemplar of what you can do in this field. Like, if you have these things in place, look what can come out, and that will attract more people here to further. You get this feedback loop. People come here because they know they can try things out and then export it to other countries.
Okay, so the view is in some ways that regulation is almost as important as the funding that you get, the access to be able to regulate and policymakers, and that's attractive. Okay, so is that not a double-edged sword? So again, the slightly provocative question. So we attract all these guys here, we attract the computing power to the country, and then we run out of energy. So that's a double-edged sword of being so attractive. Is that what's happening to us now?
What?
Do you mean?
Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to confirm what Kieran's saying. You mean physical energy? So
yes, as in electricity. Yes.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, I would think in the medium term we're fine, and I'm thinking of renewables here. I think we have a short term. By short term, I mean the next 5 to 10 years issues on modernizing the grid and underpinning our increasing dependency on wind to say, yes, wind is part of the picture, but it's not the only renewable component that we should have. But if I look forward to a decade or so by 2030 and beyond, I think we should be fine on the energy front. But I think we do have a transition period where actually things could go badly wrong if we're not very, very careful.
Yes. Okay.
I think the whole energy consumption, whether it's in Ireland or globally, because as we go into this hybrid cloud area, who knows where your computer's running in the end? It's distributed all over the world. I think finding sustainable answers to that it's a part of future computing to answer its own demands, right? So it needs to find ways in itself to answer these questions. And I think people know that. I said earlier, like in IBM, we were looking for new ways to make new components for semiconductors driven by sustainability reasons, right? And I think across all levels of this kind of stack, from hardware or in the data center, the hardware, the data center design, how it's consumed, I think these are all changing rapidly to answer this kind of energy demand that we're seeing.
I mean, I don't think computers are immune from a way of thinking that we have to think about with everything. Okay, if we only have finite resources on this planet, and maybe we will get resources from other places beyond this planet, but for now that's not something we're doing at any level. So if we're confined to these resources for everything that we're creating, we need to think about its use. Do we need it, and what are we going to do with it ultimately? What we need to think about that circular economy when it comes to computing, as you said, Michael, in terms of the actual hardware itself. But you also mentioned in something earlier that a lot of people have this quite passive relationship with computing, and while obviously that internal solving and maybe some of the neuromorphic computing, which can do things with much less energy, will help. At the moment it seems that we have a pretty voracious appetite for computing power, and I suppose the question is, even in that transition period that you talked about, Chris, do we need to start considering how we distribute that to the things that we really need as opposed to maybe the things that we want?
I think in consumption, previously, as you said, like really money was the only object. You could spin up as much compute as you wanted anywhere. I think now we're seeing that we will have like more shared infrastructures for compute intensive, for intensive compute. We saw that in COVID, people pulled together all the supercomputers so they could have one pool of resources and share information between them. We see it in IBM and Google and Amazon that, instead of everybody just asking for whatever they want, even if they don't really know what they want, they send what the compute that they want, and then Google or Amazon will figure out the best way to execute it, right, with the best efficiency of resources. We ourselves are also doing, I've been working a lot on composability, which is to answer this question of, people are building bespoke one-off servers in a particular place to answer a particular question, and once it's that trends move on, they're thrown out. Or once the data center upgrade, if you need to upgrade the memory, you need to throw out the memory and the CPUs, even though the CPUs are fine. So we're looking at new ways of even building the data center where we can have pools of resources. If you want to change the memory, you can just change the memory. If you want to build a huge memory thing, you take a huge memory system, you take the memory from the pool. So I think across all levels, where there's active research in trying to solve these energy problems, and I'm optimistic that we will find a good solution. Right?
I love all the optimism coming in. So I'm kind of hoping you're right. I lived in Johannesburg when we were living through rolling brownouts and blackouts and things. It's not a pleasant experience. So I hope to avoid that here. So now let me ask, mostly for Chris and Michael, a bit of a prediction from you guys. So, from a government perspective, from an SFI perspective, we will be looking to fund, the skills that are required in the future. But sometimes to set that up, there's a period of time between setting it up, training PhDs, getting the right people. There's a long lead time. What skills do you think we're going to need 10 years from now in Ireland that we should be thinking about right now?
You're already doing a good job of thinking about them. I mean, you have your, you mentioned the quantum center that you have with Tyndall, which we work with through we have a DTIF, a technology innovation fund project with them. Have this the quantum center, the AI. You got the data center, data analytics center inside. I think data analytics and how that evolves to be reasoning. That's going to be keys. key skills to have in these systems, how to do reasoning on data, and I think that's going to come from those type of centers. I'm not sure. I think the place where maybe we don't have so much skills is in, or where people will need skills, is in the underlying platforms that will allow all these things to come together. Like, how do you provide those systems that are efficient, that allow you to deploy these solutions, that allow people to do realize this accelerated discovery? That whole layer. It's underneath. It's that kind of bedding infrastructure. Let's call it that. That's not systems, but that lies underneath all these things. I think having good skills to build that out in an efficient way is critical.
I'm struggling here. I mean, absolutely everything that Michael says is true. I've entirely supported, but just to try and add value, I come back to this theme of government and business use of advanced computing techniques, and it comes back to sort of issues around governance of computing, the safety of computing in terms of critical decision making. So I'm thinking more of the social decision making aspects of it. And is it possible to think of a career path there, or is this a new area of research that we need to develop? I don't know, but I think there's a gap there between what computing can do and then how we apply that to societal benefit in administration, business, and government. And I think that's an area which is touching on social science, or the social sciences, as well as the technology sciences. And I don't have a developed idea or a proposal, but I think this is a gap that the planet has, and I think it's probably an opportunity for us here to lead, but I don't have it well defined even for people to be able to
really
Yeah. But Chris, I think it's true, and I think if you look at you're talking about people who can ask difficult questions as well about potential ways we could use things. So you're saying how we might use things, and there might be hundreds of ways we could use something. And maybe if you're sitting there in the development team, you've thought about 80 of those, but maybe there's another 20 because of your own experience, diversity, way of thinking you haven't even considered. And again, sort of famously, it was kind of, David Bowie talked about the potential of the internet way before, when other people said, why would anyone put false information online? So I think that diversity piece, having lots of different minds in the room, is what's going to help protect us against going down the wrong roads.
And I think also one of the things we've been talking about is the science piece. And I think generally people perceive science to be people in white coats working in the science end of Trinity. That's science, and science is nothing else. But I think that embedding of the scientific method, that it's really everywhere and people use it. We call it maybe common sense, but people use it every day. And to make those connections, that using science, it's not something alien to these other disciplines, but it's something that should be embraced.
Right. So I'm conscious our time has run out, and I'm going to ask you one last quick yes/no type question. Well, there's only two answers to it. Right. Looking forward 10 years, right? Is it of computing and where we're going to be? And I think back to my friend from the Jurassic period, when he was predicting what things were going to look like and all the technologies. He was definitely utopian, right? But we have this ability as human beings to look for the dystopian view and all the different challenges and the cyborgs and the Terminators. So 10 years from now, it's only just one way or the other, utopia or dystopia. So Chris, your thoughts?
Utopia. I'm generally quite positive. Utopia.
Excellent. Michael?
I'm a unfailing optimist, so utopia.
Ruth, last one. You just want to be obstinate about it, don't you?
I feel like there has to be a voice on the panel that says dystopian. I don't think there'll be Terminators, but I think we have a lot of complex problems. I mean, sorry, I can't answer a straight question, Kieran.
You can't, can you? Okay, so we're going to leave you on the fence on that one. Okay. And so with that, guys, it remains for me just to thank the panel. Thank you all for your time, for answering all the questions today. I really enjoyed the conversation with you. And I'm going to hand back to Rui.
Thanks, Kieran.
Thanks, Kieran.
Thanks, Kieran.
What an incredible session. I was completely mesmerized by the discussion and I wish they would continue. So a big thank you to Kieran for moderating the panel, and also a big thank you to our incredible panelists, Ruth, Chris, and our very own Michael. So this discussion is not only very, very important, it is also very timely, because our team has embarked on a very ambitious endeavor to build a platform for the future of computing. And Michael touched some aspects in his panel discussion. But we cannot do this alone, right? As Dr. Shoika said in his keynote, it takes a planet to determine a future of computing that benefits all of us. So we look forward to working and partnering with other people on our journey of building and developing the future of computing. Such an exciting area, very promising. Okay, so now let's switch to another topic, AI. 2 years ago, our CEO, Arvind Krishna, declared hybrid cloud and AI as IBM's strategic areas. As a research organization, we are the innovation engine that drives the future growth for IBM. So our Dublin lab, as part of the innovation engine, we've been developing skills in AI, and we're applying AI in areas where it matters the most. So next topic, we're going to have Dr. Elizabeth Daly to give you a virtual tour of the latest AI work in our lab. Dr. Elizabeth Daly is one of our 2 senior technical staff members. She's also a master inventor, which I mentioned earlier, we have 10, right? So very proud of her. And together with her are 3 of our outstanding research scientists. They're going to show you the latest work in AI. Okay, now, Elizabeth, you can begin the tour.
Thank you, Marie. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Daly, and I'm an STSM and research manager at the IBM Research Lab in Dublin. And I'm delighted to be here today to take you on a tour of some demos to show you just a few examples how our work is transforming industries and pushing the boundaries of AI. Where AI really excites me is where we look to infuse user knowledge and expertise into the systems. And one thing we'll see today is just how our lab is doing just that. So with that, I'd like to introduce Zhao, who's working on how AI can help create targeted social care programs. Hi, Zhao. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me.
Please tell me, can you give me a bit of background on this research? Why is it such an important area?
Well, it's important. There are very complex challenges around health and social care systems today, right? So that's a bit of the setup where we're working. The research across different disciplines is beginning to explore how social determinants of health, which could be things like transportation, nutrition, financial security, for example, how these different social factors play a critical role in a wide range of healthcare and quality of life outcomes. So what do I mean by outcomes? Things like how many times one might be readmitted to hospital, or simply the ability for one to take care of himself. So ultimately, really the goal is for us to use AI and big data to remove these inequities and inequalities and improve the health and well-being of our populations, especially those that are most vulnerable.
Can you give an example when you're talking about vulnerable populations?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, people experiencing homelessness, they're a vulnerable group, right? And it's a vulnerable group that faces significant health inequalities and worse outcomes than the rest of the population. For example, mortality is around 10 times higher than the rest of the population, and life expectancy is also around 30 years less. These are stats from the Office of National Statistics for England and Wales. And yet many of these deaths are actually from preventable causes, right? So homelessness is one example. There are several other examples of social factors like lack of transportation or access to fresh food. And sometimes these things may happen together, right? So a huge amount of factors that play this role in making populations vulnerable.
And how can AI help here?
So as you can imagine, this is a very complex decision-making environment where there's lots of different data becoming available, and even the experts in these fields, they struggle to make well-informed and timely decisions, right? So AI can help us understand how social problems affect health outcomes by looking at these very large amounts of information and finding new patterns. Right. So once we learn these patterns, we may be able to take AI a step further and use it to help identify ways to transform the lives of these vulnerable people. Right. So we can help the experts to do that. So if I want to summarize, AI can help unlock new research questions. It can help find new insights, or it can help experts shape up interventions, for example. It's, as I say, a complex ecosystem, and there are lots of actually really exciting research challenges along the way for us. We can look from problems like lack of quality data to standardization and model intelligibility or generalizability of our models. So it's a really complex ecosystem where AI can play a critical role to help.
And what do you mean by complex ecosystem?
One of the key challenges in the domain is that it spans across these areas that were typically working in silos. So specifically, you have your healthcare system, you have your social care system, and you have your government, right? So in order to work across these different domains, you need the different data sources, you need the different types of data in order to understand, say, who are your vulnerable populations. What kinds of data would you use? Say, for example, at the population level, you may have your geographical information, census type information, for example. At the individual level, you might have your healthcare records, your social care records. And finally, maybe another type of data that's actually becoming more interesting to use as well is data that is found publicly available. So things like online search trends or documentation from research studies that's available online. So the last one, so the research documentation and research papers is really important, and we see there's an ever-growing amount of research studies. So every day we see new studies being published and new findings and new hypotheses. And so it becomes very difficult for scientists, doctors, and experts in the fields to digest through all of these latest results. So that's the type of landscape we are facing.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things is that all of these data sources previously were really siloed, and so it was really difficult for the care teams to get a full picture of what's going on with the people that they're caring about. But so once you have all this data, what can you do with it? How is AI helping?
Yeah, so let me answer your question by showing you a prototype of the technology we're building. So we'll bring that up now. Okay, right. So here's a prototype that's powered by AI techniques and is helping us to tell this story, right? So the AI techniques we're using are Bayesian networks here. We're using natural language processing and knowledge graphs. And really, this demo is helping us to take this journey from data to insights using multiple information sources. So let's, for the purpose of this demo, imagine a social care worker who takes care of vulnerable populations. And in this case, let's use the example of homelessness or inadequate housing conditions. Mm-hmm. So let's call these, let's refer to these as broadly housing issues. So what the care worker wants to do in this demo is threefold, right? So the first thing is they want to find out where their population might be. Secondly, they want to know what kinds of important health problems might be relevant for this population. And thirdly, they want to find out what kinds of interventions can be undertaken. So what can be done to this vulnerable population? So the very first challenge is really finding this population, right? So we're talking about a group of people that have housing issues. So we can look at housing issues in the map here. Okay, so now here. Yeah, so we're now looking at a map of the United States, and a simple way for us to select social health issues. So I've just selected their housing issues. And so we talked about people who are experiencing homelessness, so this encompasses all of those issues. And for the purpose of this demo, let's bear in mind as well that the information that we're showing here is used only for the demonstration purposes. So it does not necessarily reflect the reality. It's just simply being used to illustrate the underlying technologies. So what I'm doing here is just finding that population, right? So doing that first task of the healthcare worker. So we can drill in further, right, and observe the geographical areas where housing issues may be more present, right? I'm just continuing to do that here. The darker areas really are showing possible hotspots where this issue might be higher than average, and I'm just clicking one of these areas here. And so that's so we can see some of the features, we can explore the data that exists for these areas, but we can go a little bit further, right? So we can actually see a bit more, right? We can use the help of a Bayesian network model to really show us a little bit more what kind of health problems are related to these housing issues, right? So in here, I'm just going to, so we're now seeing what kind of health problems and social problems, social in yellow, health in blue. And at the top, we see diabetes, right? So what the Bayesian network is helping us with here is selecting this clinical problem, this health problem that is relevant for a population that has housing issues, is vulnerable.
This is showing you other things that you might not have considered when you first said you were looking for people with housing problems. There's other things that you need to think about as well.
Yes, absolutely, exactly. And so what we can do is, now that we know that we want to consider diabetes as a health problem, we can select these two variables, and we can keep doing this using AI, right? So we can use add additional variables and continue to select our population of interest. So here now you notice that the graph, I've selected diabetes, the graph and the map are changing color, and now you're looking at the areas where there's a combination of these two issues. So healthcare, diabetes, and from the social side, housing issues. And really what we can do is use this approach to select our population of interest before we move to the second question that the healthcare worker is interested in, right? So, okay, so we click View Insights. So we've selected our population, and now we can click View Insights, right? So now we're actually looking at this population that has housing issues and diabetes. We're looking at their characteristics, right? So that's what we're doing in this screen here.
So again, we're trying to get a fuller picture of the individuals that we care about.
Yeah, correct. And you can look at what kind of comorbidities they might have, and what kind of what are the characteristics of the population. And you do this before you're perhaps going to answer the other question, which is what kinds of interventions can I run for this population? And that's really the screen that we're seeing next here, right? And in here, we're now leveraging natural language processing to mine concepts from text and to connect them to our population of interest. So in this screen, we're now seeing snippets of text or passages here that describe information that we found about interventions for this population. So we can actually look at one of them that's specifically talking about a population that has diabetes and housing issues. And it's looking in this case at drugs that might be effective for people experiencing homelessness and diabetes. So actually, just to show you here the example of this research paper, right? So there are thousands and millions of research papers published. We're basically connecting this information from the research papers to the population that we've selected here.
And so the multidisciplinary team will get access to the most up-to-date options that they could consider that they might not have thought about otherwise.
Yes, exactly. Right. So now the healthcare worker is armed, if you like, with additional information to bring to these meetings and to these other experts in the health and social care fields. Right. So they can, for this particular example, they can suggest a different type of drug for this population that might be helpful. Right. And so just finally, let me show you a representation of the technology that we're leveraging in the background of all of this demo, right? So we're using knowledge graphs and ontologies as the engine that is essentially at the back of everything we're doing, and is helping us connect everything together, right? So it's connecting the health space with the social space, and is helping us find these factors and interventions. So essentially what you're seeing on screen now is the selection that we made through this demo, and the care workers selected this population specifically.
And so this is how you're making sense of all these different data sources and bringing them together.
Yes, correct. That's it. So yeah. So I guess to sum up, really, the three key messages, I suppose, are that there's ever-growing amounts of usable data, but there's limited human capacity to digest it all. So AI can really help us to do this. We don't fully understand social problems and healthcare problems together, and how one affects the other. So we can again use AI to leverage this data and mine patterns and help care managers and health professionals make the better decisions, more informed decisions. And finally, really, it's about bringing these insights to transform the lives of the most vulnerable people of our society, taking into account both the health factors and the social factors together.
Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us this work.
Thank you.
So Joe has just shown us just how disparate data sources and knowledge graphs can come together to provide real actionable insights to help develop tailored care programs. Now we'll turn to a completely different application area, where the data is coming from thousands of sensors and machines, and how we're using AI and knowledge graphs to make sense of all this information and help bring AI to manufacturing. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jörn.
Hi, hello. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me today, Jörn. So you're working on developing solutions for asset management in Industry 4.0. But the first question, I think, for our audience is, can you tell us a bit more about what is Industry 4.0?
Yeah, Industry 4.0 actually is the currently ongoing industrial revolution, right? So, and that actually means that nowadays, you're trying to introduce digitalization in the production, and that means that computers are controlling the whole production process, right? So everything in the factory is basically monitored through IoT sensors, and then controlled and optimized by computers, and that's what you call Industry 4.0. And it's estimated that this process that's currently ongoing will lead to production increases by 20% and reduce of waste that is produced in the factory by 10%.
So manufacturing is pretty big in Ireland, so that must be something that's quite relevant to our lab in particular.
Yes, actually, manufacturing is contributing 37% to the GDP in Ireland, and that's the second largest value in the world and the largest one in Europe. So actually, Ireland is a manufacturing powerhouse, and that's why also we're researching these topics here in Ireland.
And so if a factory wants to be able to leverage your technology, what are the biggest challenges?
The biggest challenges nowadays with these modern factory actually is the amount of data, right? So it's estimated that by 2025, they're going to create 70 zettabytes of data, huge amounts, right? So, and we need to be able to process all the data. Nowadays, most of the data is laid aside, nobody's really looking into, but to be able to optimize the production, we need to understand what machines are doing. We need to be quickly react to their production, and we need to be able to optimize these things. And that's what we're doing with digital twins.
So digital twins are a really interesting area. Can you tell us a bit more about them?
Yeah, a digital twin actually is a digital AI model that you create for all the different elements in the factory. For example, for each machine, for each robot, you create such an AI model. And that allows you then to diagnose anomalies that are happening in the production process. For example, when something goes wrong in a machine, right? So that you quickly be able to, first of all, realize these anomalies. Second, then to diagnose where this is coming from, explain it. And last but not least, also you can then use these AI models to predict ahead of how these machines and factories are going to behave to have a better planning and optimization of the production that is ongoing in the factory.
So you're trying to create this virtual representation or this surrogate of your whole factory. Can you talk about how you're doing that? That must be very tricky.
Yeah, actually, it contains some challenges, and we can switch over to a demo, and I'm going to show you how that looks like.
Right.
So the demo, what you're seeing here is the first problem that we really have in these settings is this huge amount of data that is created, right? So, and we're selecting here a data set that contains about 100,000 data points. So these are 100,000 IoT devices collecting data in the factory. And the real challenge with these IoT devices is not just the sheer number, right? So it is actually that these are badly labeled. So the names that these IoT devices have are primarily constructed out of acronyms that nobody really understands. But to actually then derive these AI models that can explain these things, we need to understand what type of machines do we have in the factory, what type of robots do we have in the factory. And that's what this tool here does. It goes through the whole data set, analyzes acronyms, and then use an NLP approach to learn the meaning of these acronyms, and then to derive an understanding of how that factory actually is structured. And it does that smartly, right? So using an AI approach that instead of going through the whole data set, all these 100,000 entries, is summarizing everything and only showing you the main relevant points. And then it's extracting essentially a model of the factory. And that's then also a knowledge graph. And what you see there on the left-hand side, this is the hierarchy of the factory. So in this case, we have the factory in Austin, a factory line with robots and assemblers. And then essentially in there, for the robot also, we have things like the data points that we're showing there. The other thing that we're analyzing there actually is also the data quality, because we need to have good quality data for then building out the digital twins and the AI models.
So we've got a virtual representation of our factory now, and we know where everything is fixed and how they're connected. What are we
Exactly.
seeing?
And not just of the factory, actually also of the different robots, right? So, for example, of the different elements in the factory. You see here an example. This is a robot in the factory, right? So you have the 3D model on the top, basically like left, that is basically like moving in the factory, right? So the data that is generated, you see basically like on the bottom left as well, right? So this is the time series data that it generates. And then basically like we're doing a similar thing, what you have seen in the previous demo from Zhao, is basically creating knowledge graphs that describe what the robot is doing. And that's what you see on the top right. So there we're linking the data that we basically like getting from the robot to basically like a model of the robot itself that's also encoded in the graph. And what we're encoding there is the physics.
So you're using the equations, but where are you getting them from?
Similar approach to what Zhao is showing you, right? So we're looking into scientific papers, and they basically like in in our case, we're looking particularly into equations of these papers, right? So because we learned that also when we think back in school in physics, we use these equations to describe the physical behaviors of the things in our surroundings. And the same thing works with basically like machines and robots in factories. And there are millions of scientific papers that describes that. The only thing that you need to do is being able to understand these equations and understanding how we can apply them to basically like to our model. We're using an NLP approach as well. And then we're extracting essentially like the core information in this equation, which is the causality. So what is basically like causing which effects in the factory, right? So in the machine. And that's what we're adding to the knowledge graph. And what you're seeing there are new relationships popping up in the knowledge graph. And that is actually new physical information that allows us to better understand how the robot is basically like then behaving. And then
once you know how the different sensors should be relating to each other, it means you can get a better understanding how they should be behaving. Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. We get a better understanding of how they should be behaving. And then basically what we're actually then doing is learning a machine learning model that actually really learns how they're actually behaving. And then we can use that machine learning model to, for example, predict the behavior and discover anomalies. And that's why they then allows us to compute things like, for example, the health score.
Okay. And so that's doing it for we've seen it for an individual robot, but you're also then able to do it at the factory level, right?
Exactly. And that's what you're seeing here. So this actually is a digital twin for the whole factory. And that is basically like a production site from IBM that we have in Poughkeepsie, where we are assembling servers, right? So, and the challenge there really is that each server that you order from IBM is a custom build according to your specification. Right. So, and that basically means that every time when you have a custom build, you're not 100% sure, like for how much time assembling of that server actually takes. And what we're doing in the digital twin is learning basically like the assembly times, and then be able to predict these assembly times correctly and give you then basically like a prediction, for example, like of how long it takes to do this assembly.
So if a business is going to implement this, what's going to be the real impact for them?
The real impact actually is that you want to get to these 20% productivity increases that I mentioned in the beginning, right? So, and you're actually doing that by building out like these digital twins that allow you first to better monitor the systems in the factory, to quickly detect anomalies and quickly react to them, to fix them, so that you basically have less downtime in the factory, right? The second thing, what you want to do is basically like you can use these AI models to do compute predictions of the factory behavior. For example, like these basically like assembly times, right? So, or for example, like how much material usage a machine has. And then you can use that information to optimize the processes in the factory, right? So, and then last but not least, you also can use these prediction models to basically then predict things like assembly time. And that allows you to optimize the whole logistic process across the factory. And that's why you're getting basically to these like 20% of productivity increases altogether. And that's basically like what we're not just doing together with IBM here in this case, but we're always basically like working and looking out for partners across the world and also in Ireland to continue that work.
Jörn, it's very interesting work. And listen, thank you so much for taking the time to share it with us today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So thank you so much to Jörn for showing us how to make sense of the overwhelming stream of sensor and manufacturing data by taking advantage of the physics equations that govern a lot of these processes. But equations govern so many other systems, from biological to atmospheric. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Sergey, who's working on blending AI with applied mathematics. Hi, Sergey. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
So why why do you think this is going to be the next big thing in AI?
Pretty much like Jorn said, many AI techniques rely upon a blend of data-driven insights and prior knowledge encoded in mathematical models. Broadly speaking, this prior knowledge helps to regularize the process of hyperparameter selection for AI algorithms, and also importantly to extract explainable features. In fact, physics in AI is a hot topic these days, and one of the big questions there is how one can blend mathematics of biophysical processes with AI algorithms to extract explainable features from noisy observations of complex dynamical real-world phenomena.
So when you say that it's helping tune the parameters, this is that it's helping the model be more accurate because it's able to more quickly understand when it's right and when it's not right. Is that right?
Yep.
And obviously, being able to provide explainable features is extremely important because, in particular, for the end user, when they're going to be able to try and consume the outputs from the AI solution, explainable features become really important. Can you give me an example of some of these processes that you're talking about?
Yeah, of course. So, for example, physics of fluid flow is reasonably well understood these days, and basic mathematical models of fluid dynamics may provide a principled way to extract explainable features. To be a little bit more specific, it was noticed in many experiments that inflow and outflow rates of blood for healthy tissue are different to those of cancerous tissues. And in this case, physics of blood flow can be used to quantify inflow and outflow rates, which in turn, suggests that inflow and outflow can serve as explainable features for tissue classification. And in fact, to give you a better idea, I'd like to show one of the demos we're working on now. So this is a first of a kind prototype, which was developed for Mater Hospital at University College Dublin and for the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. And this work was supported by Irish Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund.
Okay.
And
so let's see.
In this video, you see that surgeons usually in this video you see what surgeons usually see during what they call fluorescence guided surgery. Namely, a patient is given a tracer. So what tracer is a fluorescent dye which emits light and helps to visualize blood flow through tissues. So once the dye starts emitting light, and on the video you're going to see it in kind of green color, what surgeons are looking for is to determine inflow and outflow rates of blood for different tissues in the field of view of the camera. Okay, now it starts to...
So this is the dye working its way through the system, is it?
Right, that's correct. And as you can appreciate from just by looking at this video, quite a lot is going on, and it's pretty hard for a surgeon to determine inflow and outflow rates just by visual inspection. This is where we try to help them. To this end, we make use of computer vision to extract time series representing concentrations of the fluorescent dye in different regions of interest of the tissue. And you can see those graphs appearing on the screen now. Next, what we need to do is to extract explainable features from those time series. And for that, we build on what has been observed experimentally, namely that tumors tend to have slower dye inflow and outflow due to specifics of their own blood supply. To estimate inflow and outflow rates from the extracted time series, we use simple biophysical models, namely compartment models of blood flow, which allow us to extract inflow and outflow rates of a dye in different regions. And then these rates are fed back into a classifier which predicts labels for different regions of interest.
So you're using the fact that the blood is flowing at a different rate and then being able to analyze the video using this prior knowledge to really be able to clean up that noisy signal of the real world data that's coming into it, and then be able to really show to the surgeon what parts might be of concern.
Yeah, that is correct. Roughly speaking, we clean up the data and show what's relevant.
That's wonderful. And so this is an example here in surgery. Are there other applications that you've been looking at?
Yes, that's correct. Like I said, this is a pretty basic biophysical process. So for example, we can use this technique in geophysics, and I'm going to show another demo in a second. In geophysics, this technique can be used to reconstruct complex processes given incomplete and coarse measurements. So on this video here, in the top right panel, you can see simplified signal, a set of coarse measurements representing a complicated turbulent signal provided by a computational fluid dynamics model shown in the top left panel, and the reconstruction of the complex signal shown in the bottom left panel, together with the reconstruction error on the bottom right. So it is not hard to see that the very coarse signal on the right bears little or no resemblance to the complex signal on the left, which it was obtained from. For that reason, the reconstruction blends the simplified signal with prior physical knowledge encoded in Navier-Stokes equations, basic model of fluid dynamics, to reveal the complexity of the actual process generating our coarse and simplified observations.
So let me see if I've got this straight. So it's on the left-hand side at the top, I'm seeing the original signal. On the right-hand side at the top, it's a really, really simple version. So it's not very detailed representation, but then you have to go from that simple representation and try and reconstruct the really complicated one.
Correct. And the only possible way of doing it is to take into account physics. Otherwise, you can have a million different ways of getting the coarse representation. So that's actually the key challenge here. Now, currently, together with our fellow researchers from IBM Research in UK and Yorktown, we're applying this very technique to design an AI algorithm which can use coarse satellite images to help identifying carbon footprint in urban environments, which is of key importance in reducing climate change risks.
Thanks so much, Sergey. That's really interesting work, and thank you for showing it to us.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you so much to Sergey for sharing with us this work. And as you can see, there are many applications that would benefit from the approach of combining AI with applied maths. So I really want to take a moment now to thank our presenters today. So Zhao, Jörn, Sergey, thank you for showing us just a small sample of how we really are using AI to transform industries by leveraging the combination of wealth of data that we have and combined with domain knowledge. So the direction for me that's most exciting is that all of these works are moving towards merging AI solutions with human knowledge. And importantly, these are steps that go towards not just making AI solutions explainable, but systems where a user can influence them and also control them, which makes AI truly human-centered. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. I hope you all enjoyed the demo. I would tell you that I cannot tell you how proud I am of our incredible team and also the incredible work we do. And AI remains a critically important area for our lab, and we're going to continue to invest in the research and development of AI, especially in areas that matter to the local economy and matter to the local innovation ecosystem. Okay, so now let me flip the coin to the other side of AI. As you know that, to develop AI, we need a lot of data, lots of data, right? And there's no doubt that AI has made data increasingly valuable. Today, businesses and also institutions are facing competing imperatives. On the one side, We want more data, more accessible data, in order to advance AI. But on the other side, we must manage the security and privacy of data, especially when it comes to your personal data. So how do we tackle such challenge? How do we balance the needs for developing technology and also the trustworthiness and also fairness? So today we are very fortunate and honored to have Dr. Colin Liddington, a renowned technology and business journalist, to chair a panel discussion. And we have a group of outstanding experts from government, from academia, from technology, and from business. So with that, Colin, now over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here for IBM Research Dublin's 10th anniversary celebration and honored to host this panel on data and AI privacy. We cannot talk about AI without talking about data, because data is at the very heart of AI, which means at the heart of AI is us, our personal information, and the information that's gleaned from organizations and their operations. Data is sensitive, it's precious, and it's powerful, and it requires both regulatory and ethical and research safeguards. And our panel today is going to explore some of those challenges. I'm delighted to welcome our 4 expert panelists, who are Dr. Alessandro Curioni, who's an IBM Fellow, Vice President of IBM Europe and Africa, and Director of the IBM Research Lab in Zurich. On top of being responsible for IBM corporate research in Europe, he leads global research in security and the future of computing. He's also an internationally recognized leader in the area of high-performance computing and computational science, where his innovative thinking and seminal contributions have helped solve some of the most complex scientific and technological problems in healthcare, aerospace, consumer goods, and electronics. He was a member of the winning team, recognized with the prestigious Gordon Bell Prize in 2013 and 2015, and his research interests now include AI, big data, and novel computing paradigms, such as neuromorphic and quantum computing. And I love the detail that he started at IBM Research Zurich as a PhD student in 1993, before he joined as a research staff member in 1998. So there's quite a long and distinguished career with IBM there. We also have joining us from IBM, Mary O'Brien, who's the general manager of IBM Security, the largest enterprise security company in the world. She leads a global team focused on delivering IBM's extensive security product and services portfolio. She's a strategic partner to many CEOs, CISOs, and CIOs on cybersecurity, AI, and IT strategy. And before taking over the IBM Security Unit, Mary led research and development for the division and is an engineer who joined IBM in 2007. So we have a nice link across research and business there. We're also joined by Ultan O'Carroll, who's the Deputy Commissioner for Technology and Operational Performance in the Irish Data Protection Commission. He previously served as Assistant Commissioner for 7 years, where actually we would have sat on a panel together in quite some time past, and led on technology advisory and policy matters for DPC at national and EU level, while also working across the DPC's regulatory units on audit, compliance, and enforcement related to SME and multinational organizations. And he now also leads on GDPR accreditation and certification. And finally, Dave Lewis is an associate professor at the School of Computer Science and Statistics at Trinity College Dublin and head of its artificial intelligence discipline. He's also deputy director of the ADAPT SFI Research Center for Digital Content Technology, where he leads ADAPT's program of industry collaborative research and has led its multidisciplinary research theme on data governance. His research focuses on the use of open semantic models to manage the data protection and data ethics issues associated with digital content processing. And I'd like to start first with Alessandro, because AI and data, as we can see, it's such an incredibly complex area. And would you give an insider's view of IBM's work in this research area and some of the problems that you're trying to solve?
As we have said, AI is one of the major transformational technology that we have available today. And one of the major value that AI is creating is exactly helping us to make sense of a huge amount of data, connected them, and eventually allowing us to take better decisions. But you don't have to forget that you don't have AI without data, and eventually big data have a minimal value without AI technology. And while we are developing AI models, we need, especially when we want to use it AI in business, we do need to create trust around these AI models and the use of the AI. And to create this trust, and this is also a big focus that we do have in IBM and IBM research, we do need to make sure that AI are not black boxes. So we are able to explain why certain results come out. They need to be fair. As I told you, AI is based on the data that we have used to train the AI models. So if there is bias in this data, this bias is transferred to the model itself. So we do need to have and develop technology that allow to detect and eventually correct these biases, both in the data and in the model itself. Of course, AI needs also to be robust and secure, right? And look, AI needs data to train the models, but again, also AI, when we use AI to analyze data, can be strongly biased by the data that we put in, right? It's the first time in the IT developments in which we can attack an AI system without attacking the system itself, but simply biasing the data that we put in. So we do need to create models that are able to understand if there are problems with the model from a security viewpoint and correct vulnerabilities and correct these vulnerabilities. And the first thing that is even probably more important and connect directly to the data is transparency on how these models are built, but also which data are used to build these models, and eventually also the privacy, the privacy concern with the use of this data. If we create AI models, again, starting from a set of data that expose sensitive information, we need to make sure that we cannot back engineering, right, the provenance and the identity and eventually sensitive information that are in this data. So in IBM research, we are doing a lot of work exactly to make sure that we can develop AI that is trustable, secure, and eventually preserve also both the ownership and the privacy of the data that were used to develop these models.
Thank you very much for that. Mary, I wanted to turn to you now as the business-facing side of IBM here. Sure. On our panel. The AI and data management is the complement to the research side, that business side. What's the mission and strategy around AI and data when you're in talking to companies? How are you presenting what IBM does?
Sure. So basically, if we step back and we look at businesses today, there isn't a CIO, a CISO, a CDO, a CRO, just to mention half of the C-suite, who isn't paranoid about a cyber attack and about the data that's the fuel of their business getting out into the wild. So they have a duty of care to protect the data that fuels their business, whether that's the data that pertains to their employees, to their clients, their IP, how they transact with their clients, and basically the fundamental data that is the fuel of their business. So it's complicated, and our clients are, they have too much data. They need to know where their data is. They need to understand the laws of the land that data is residing in or being used in. They need all kinds of tools and capabilities to help them to manage the data, to govern the data, to protect the data. And of course, that data is the target of cybercriminals today, because that data is what they can use to extort payment in terms of ransom from customers who let that data leak, because of course we know that there is huge reputational damage and financial damage associated with data pertaining to that, sensitive data in particular, pertaining to a business leaking out into the public. So the C-suite is absolutely paranoid about understanding where their data is and what programs and tools they need to put in place to protect it, in order to make sure they've got resilient businesses that can stand the test of time, stay up and running, protect themselves, themselves from reputational damage and financial damage in the event of a cyber situation.
Great. And Alton, from the DPC perspective, what regulatory guidelines are in place around AI for utilizing data and protecting citizens, and maybe a few of the key concerns and challenges, although we'll dig down into some more of those, I'm sure, as we talk further. So you're on mute.
Thanks, Colin. Technical troubles there in the technology panel. Yeah, there are many issues, and we will talk about them, I'm sure. But I suppose in terms of guidance and what our thinking is about AI and machine learning, it's been evolving over time, because, of course, AI isn't a new phenomenon. It's been around for quite some time. And you can see somewhat of an evolution in terms of, initial database usage through to big data, linked data, machine learning. I worked on a project on machine learning before I came here, 10 years ago, and things weren't great then in terms of the technology and its capability, but it's advanced an awful lot now, and we're into neural networks and so on. All kinds of models and ways and approaches to doing these things. It's pervasive. We know that now. It's on our phones, it's in our lives, on our TVs, our smart TVs, it's everywhere. We have to deal with it. And of course, for us in the DPC, the interest is in where personal data is used within machine learning and AI. And it's not always the case that's the case. But when it does happen, and it's happening more often, that's where we get involved. Our concerns are really around the different dynamics and the impacts of AI compared to, say, predictive analytics or big data in the past. Also around the provenance of the data, and people have talked about that already. It's very important that people understand where data has come from, how it's being used, and why it's being used. Just because there's a lot of text data up on Reddit, people talking about things, doesn't mean it's good data or it's relevant data. It might train a natural language AI engine, but it might bring with it an awful lot of problems as well. So it's those kinds of things that we look out for and that we're concerned about. And as we go into the future, I think those differences are going to become more acutely involved in regulation. We'll see more regulations. Already talk about a European AI regulation. The European Data Protection Board and the European Supervisor have already produced an opinion about that, highlighting concerns to do with provenance, risk management, the whole idea about sandboxes and things like that, and how GDPR will apply when there are other regulations that seem to be involved with personal data processing. So I think it's a fertile ground at the moment for discussion in terms of compliance and in personal data processing, and we have to think about risk and the human factors that are involved in AI at all times. So that's where we come in.
Okay, and so GDPR is the main application or the main piece of regulation right now for us in Europe around this area, and we're looking ahead towards an AI, more extensive legislation coming in, plus all these other little pieces of legislation.
Yeah, and I think we'll also find, codes of conduct being written, and they may have co-regulation status at some point. We may see delegated or implementing acts coming out of the Commission because they're empowered to do those kinds of things. And for me as well, being responsible for certification, we'll see those as well. Those accountability mechanisms will be important because they're likely to be focused on particular kinds of AI or particular uses of AI or particular applications of AI.
Right. Okay. And Dave, can we turn to you on the role and responsibility for academia? I wonder, can you give us a bit of the perhaps the teaching and the research perspective, since you would straddle both of those? And I wonder is around some questions around the curriculum, whether privacy by design, for example, is widely taught, what needs changing, what shapes how researchers work with data, and how you train tomorrow's data scientists and computer scientists who'll go out and work for AI companies.
Yeah, probably the common theme across both the teaching and the research side of trying to address some of these issues is interdisciplinarity. So certainly I teach some basic AI and data ethics in a number of different courses, and we try and engage with people at a level accessible across disciplines. So we do that both for engineering courses, but also for electives where you'd have people from humanities and medicine coming along. So we both have to make sure that we're conveying some of the problems and how to deal with it beyond people who are necessarily just going into an AI focused or an engineering focused career, because in fact our medics and our future lawyers and our future scientists of various forms are all going to be engaged with AI at some level or other. So they all have to engage with some of the ethical issues. So we focus more on issues both around critical thinking related to ethics and how that integrates with the innovation process, because it's the speed of innovation and understanding of the cycle of technology and digital innovation that really underpins a lot of the problems in that sense when you look at it from a long-term perspective. And that interdisciplinary perspective also applies on the research side. So we work both in European programs where we're working with philosophers, legal scholars, and also at a national level where certainly the government recognizes the importance of data governance in its AI strategy. And we've a new collaboration, partly funded by industry and SFI, which is bringing together a wide range of academics and their industry counterparts, again, drawing from across law, business, philosophy, as well as obviously computer science. So I think the understanding that, the issue that this is a technology solution alone, and that technology can provide the solution as well, is something that we're trying to move away from and trying to have a much broader discussion across disciplines in how to address that, both in the teaching side and through our research.
Okay, maybe we can focus then more generally for the whole panel. I've got a really broad question for you. Do we think about data in the wrong way, and do we recognize its value properly? And maybe what are some of the reasons for how it is viewed? Is it too abstract? Is it too boring for a public to understand what maybe some of the risks are, or what some of the things we need to think about? Is it just seen as a kind of a neutral source of information for applications? And I mean, these seem to be some of the major challenges when I'm talking to a readership that struggles with these questions. And you're the experts. I wonder what your view is on that broader societal question. How do we as a society, as researchers and businesses, view data, and what problems perhaps does that view throw up for you? And I don't know, maybe Alessandro, we'll come back to you on that one, because can you give us an insight into how that might influence how you shape research efforts?
Yeah. Look, I do think that this is a very, very good point for discussion. I do believe that in the business world, everybody understand the huge value that data has, right? And you start from this understanding, then eventually, you try eventually to do everything you can to try to extract this value from the data. And of course, you have to do, in an ethical way with obeying all the rules and so on and so forth. But this field understanding of the value and creating technology that allow us to really extract this value and make this value real, it's very mature. In the general public, I do believe that this perception around the value of data that we create every second when we are speaking, when we are surfing, when we are using, all the 1,000 devices that we do have. So the perception of the value is not there yet. And I do believe that this is a problem, because without having everybody understanding the value of what is creating as a person, right, then it's difficult also to have everybody to understand that one has to put, guardrails, certain rules, has to be very careful in the way you interact with machine and so on and so forth, because while you are doing this, you are exposing part of yourself, your value, and you can also get in danger situations. So creating this, I would say, global awareness about the value of the data in the public probably is a very, very important thing that we have to do as a society.
Okay, and Mary, maybe you have a view on that as well, because I think you're in the interesting position of being down at the sort of business coalface and talking to organizations, and I wonder, do they understand the responsibilities and the risks? Do they have particular frustrations in trying to figure out what to do with data that they're gathering and what to hang on to and how to manage it?
Yeah, so I think the answer to your question is actually multidimensional, and that's what makes this whole topic need to have people from all the various disciplines that this panel represent on today. Because while I'm representing the face of business, I'm also a person who's got personal data that's been used to and gathered and maybe abused, who knows, in the running of other businesses. So what is the fuel of business for one person and the data needed to glean value or make money from a business point of view is the private and personal data of somebody else. And that's the whole challenge and the whole dilemma for us to be able to bring together those perspectives and understand that businesses want to work in a frictionless way. They need to be able to do what they do to deliver to their customers and their clients. But the data that they're using in order to deliver those services needs to be treated the way the people who really own that data expect it to be treated, with the right degree of governance, obfuscation, privacy protection, and so on. So that's why we're all here, because it is a multidimensional problem, Carlin.
Okay, and there's obviously a lot there that I think both Ultan and Dave can both speak to. Ultan, maybe we'll take you first on some of the regulatory aspects of this, because you're dealing with companies all the time and fining companies for not appropriately handling data. So what are you seeing in your role?
Well, firstly, of course, it has to be recognized, I think, that our role it takes place when things go wrong. When things are going well, we don't get involved. So we've recognized for a long time, and along with other supervisory authorities across Europe, that the conversation needs to move beyond ethics, because you can talk theoretically or philosophically about whether an automated vehicle is going to kill Granny on the side of the road or the passengers in the car in a certain hypothetical scenario for so long. But from our world, GDPR applies wherever personal data is used. We have e-privacy as well, which is involved in telecommunications data, which is confidential personal human data. So when technologists produce engineering products that are based on AI, that treat it purely as a data engineering exercise, or a black and white bits and pieces exercise that produces product for business, a business that can sell that to a consumer or a person, a data subject, And that produces impacts because the provenance of the data hasn't been properly thought about. There are biases inherent in it, and particularly when it creates problems for people, like, if it's involved in HR hiring schemes, with social scoring. These are things that are coming up all the time. In medical devices or insurance, where things rely heavily on outcomes from huge analysis of data that goes on, that drives AI in the past. And if it turns out that those kinds of processing operations lead to data subject rights infringements, that lead to security issues like a cyber breach or whatever, because data has been collected, or even if there are even basic problems about identifying who the data subjects are, whose data is being used, how it's being collected, what legal basis was used for that collection in the first place, because that is processing that's covered by GDPR as well, and it's very important. And that all gears back towards people's trust in those kinds of products and the outcomes from those things. If you don't have trust, if you have a digital monster that people are afraid of, then you're going to end up with huge problems with uptake eventually. And this whole idea of AI for good becomes a risk in itself. So that wider question has to be remembered at all times. Why are you using AI? Are there alternatives? Are there better ways of doing things? Is it a good product? Are we monitoring it when it goes out into the wild? Do we see what impacts and harms it's delivering? Even though the development and engineering teams have already done their unit testing and said everything's okay, but it turns out not to be. And we really need to, as Dave has said, education needs to look at these things as well, because the unintended consequences have to be regarded from the very beginning.
Well, I think thank you so much for providing that perfect segue into asking David to answer this question as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Again, some of our experiences on looking at this from a disciplinary perspective as well. I think there's a couple of problems that sort of reveal to us. One, I think our ability to sort of collect and process and extract value from data at massive volumes has really outpaced our understanding, our societal understanding of that. And I think it was interesting, Mary referred to, data owners, but even that concept isn't very well defined. We have packages of rights associated to data, if it's related to personal data or perhaps copyright, or some jurisdictions related to organization of databases. But we don't have that sense of, do we really own data in the way that we know that we own a car or a plot of land? Okay, and I think that's, that needs to be advanced, societally and internationally, to get a clearer understanding of the mechanisms we can use to do this in a more trustworthy way, as Alton was referring to. And I think the other thing we need to do in addressing that is also, how do we perhaps leverage those aspects of ownership collectively? So a lot of the focus of data protection is the rights of the individual. And, in fact, some of perhaps even the most difficult problems we have with the use of data, for example, the perpetuation of bias, the difficulty in constraining the propagation of conspiracy theories and things are really harming, our society in many ways. That won't be protected very well through individual rights. We need to have some collective levers over how those are managed and governed. And I think there's some some light appearing there in some of the EU legislation. So the Data Governance Act is bringing in some recognition of trusted data intermediaries and pointing to perhaps new types of bodies such as data cooperatives, which, there are some working examples of those out there that may help us figure out new societal mechanisms for governing the use of data. That it's not always a sort of a tug between, individuals, companies and regulators. There may be other fora that we can decide some of these issues, especially on the ethical side, where the answers aren't always amenable to legislation.
I have to ask you, what's a data cooperative? I haven't heard of that before.
Okay, so there's examples, for example, in Switzerland, where they're very good sort of cooperative protection law. some hospitals have made the sharing of patient data to, for example, companies wanting to do drugs trials, managed through a cooperative. So people, it's controlled through a board. The members of those boards are elected by the patients, by a representation of the patient. So there's a more sort of democratic control, and therefore a higher level of trust. That's the point of it, is that the hospitals are able to govern the sharing of information in a way that's more trusted by the people who, if you like, own patients.
I'd love then to take all of that and turn back to Alessandro and Mary, perhaps on how does IBM then take in these considerations as you develop, as you work for in research and in the products you produce. And a connected question to that is, I wonder, is regulation clear enough for you? Does the fact that there's uncertainty in pending new legislation create difficulty both on the research and on the products that you might be talking to businesses about? So maybe first, how do you take in all these concerns, and how is it managed within the research process working towards a product? And then that piece about regulation.
Yes. So very good question. And we are active in research and working with the security business unit. We really try to create innovation that allow us to create security around data, to preserve the privacy, and make sure that across the full data chain, we are compliant with all the regulation that exists. But I want to make a point here. We have spoken about data as something static and regulation as something static. That is not true, because data are dynamics, even if they come from the same sources. Sometimes you have more data, less data, more fields, less things that are missing, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, as you said, regulation are changing, right? You have the basic one, but you need to adapt, and every geography, have new ones, and so on and so forth. So we have also a lot of work trying to create technology that automate, the checking and the response towards compliance to this regulation. Yeah, you get a set of data, you first classify them, you see where there is a risk or evident risk, and then you check the policies and eventually the regulation around, and you monitor the use of the data in real time, right, to see if the use is compliant with all the policy and regulation. And if you do see a breach, right, you detect it and you try to respond to the breach as fast as possible. So all this technology, is research that is getting transferred to business, and is super important to really to be able to handle some of the challenges that you have mentioned. And the important things, complexity one level up, data are dynamics, and regulation and policies are dynamics. We do need systems that treat the problem in a dynamic way.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, I'll just add a little to that. The evolution of all of these data regulations and compliance regulations and so on over the last, decade is costly for an organization who's creating products and services with an absolute fundamental belief that we've got to treat data the way it should be treated, really understand the jurisdiction that we're operating in, and make sure that we're totally and absolutely compliant with the letter of the law. So to that end, it's costly because we have an army of people who actually are trying to stay on top of the changes in regulations in order to ensure that as we develop capability, that, well, firstly, we develop runbooks to make sure that, in the event of a data breach or in the event of a cyber situation, that the people who are dealing with the aftermath of that situation know what to do. So we have runbooks that actually are constantly updated to tell them, who they need to contact what the time frame is, but for them to make the right contact, and so on and so forth. So we have an army of people trying to keep us whole, keep us on the right track, and also we're trying to automate our actions and our capabilities all the time. So costly business, I would say, and very live, and a top priority for us.
Okay, I've got a question that is something that I'm quite curious about for all of you. Has there been a turning point at which you have seen a sudden greater awareness about some of the issues around AI and data that you deal with day to day? And I'm thinking because I can think of a number of things that have come out in public in terms of stories, for example. But and Mary, you've sort of touched on the thing about, there's a reputational concern for companies as well now. That's very clear because we've had some public examples of where things have gone wrong. And certainly on the DPC side, there's decisions and cases now which are beginning to raise awareness as well. I just wonder, for something that you have seen as a turning point that has helped you in doing the work you do, or speaking to the communities you speak to, or shift perspective on the some of the issues around AI and the data management that have been, I don't know, either helpful or made your own jobs easier, I suppose, because you don't have to try to do all the explaining about the issues yourselves, but you can point to something. And I don't know, Dave, maybe you want to tackle that one first, because you're working with a good spread of ages, students coming in who, I wonder, is there a level of awareness around this, and have things changed since maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago, and with researchers as well?
I think it is, certainly I find actually the continuous flow of stories around, media stories about data and AI and the good and the bad outcomes of that. That, from an educational point of view, that's the gift that keeps on giving, because we have so many examples. And actually, from a research point of view, there's now groups that are starting to assemble all of these stories into more usable corpora. So actually, we're getting to the stage from that we're getting not quite statistically significant, but an appreciatively large range of stories, often because they filter out through the media that we can use for our studies. I think still in the AI, we're relying on the media often to report these, and we have the occasional academic study. On the data protection side specifically, certainly I think the good work of the DPC and the other supervisory authorities across Europe is really valuable, because you again have a constant flow of decisions about particular cases, and that's great because those are in the public domain actually in an awful lot of detail, so we're able to sort of access those to find particular examples, especially on the research side, where our understandings and conceptions and the proposals we're making for how to better and more efficiently govern both the data protection and the AI ethics aspect of things stands up to the decisions that are actually being made through case law. So again, it comes back to that interdisciplinary links we need there. We need to interpret the case law. We need to be understanding how things are presented in the media, which isn't always unbiased in its presentation of the issues, and be able to navigate through those to sort of try and come to some useful solutions.
I can't possibly be considered to be somebody who's biased in my opinions. But Alessandro and Mary, maybe could you take that from an IBM angle, and both on the internal research side, and then on the outer encountering business side, and then finally, Alton, I would love your opinion on that as well. Alessandro, do you want to talk a little bit about, was there a turning point that has been useful?
Yeah, look, I do believe that a lot of the discussion around AI, when artificial intelligence, in the good, in the bad, right, help to push this awareness that there are problems connected, right, from AI to data, and this expanded awareness, I think that helped a lot to put more focus. Second are any, let's say, regulatory activity that started between from government, but then developed with collaboration between government, academic, and business around the data, for example, DPCR, and the overall AI regulation or ethical use of AI that happened, for example, in EU. Very, very important point, because we brought the problem at the center of the discussion. It's not only a people problem, it's not only an academic problem, it's not only a business problem, but it's a problem of the society. And so that I do think that has been very important turning point for everybody.
Great, thanks, Mary. On the business side? So there must be plenty on the business side, I would say.
Absolutely. There's been an inflection point in the past, I don't know, maybe 5 to 7 years, because of the attention from the regulator, from the compliance officer, from the auditors, and because of the imposition of fines. It has brought what was a conversation to reality, and it is now a risk in financial terms, and people wake up to that in business, financial terms and reputational terms to a business if they are inappropriately dealing with data, whether in the AI context or not. And, if that data gets out into the wild, it's moved from being a discussion that I might have with a chief information security officer or a CRO or a CDO to it's a CEO level conversation now because of the level of risk in financial and reputational terms to a business, I would say.
Interesting shift as well, because it used to be kind of the guys in the basement or the women in the basement doing the tech stuff and viewed as a tech issue. Now it's up in the C-suite. It's changed. Oltan, from the regulatory point of view, has there been a turning point that you think has made it easier to focus attention around this area?
For myself, I wouldn't say a turning point, but more of a slow burn, I think. I think what we're seeing is a bit of a problem in the market, in that the issues that come up with AI don't seem to be going away. We keep hearing stories about gender-based bias or racism in AI, or things to do with people hiring for jobs or their financial status and things like that. And those things have huge impact on people's daily lives. And those are the things that we keep hearing about, fortunately. So I think it is something that's not going away. It's not going to go away. There is the hype cycle still. Everyone calls, their macro their first macro they did in Excel back in 1991, an AI. I heard one chief executive say that on a podcast. I was very distressed by it. So the thinking and the discussion we've had today is very important. It is real. There is regulation that applies. There are sanctions. They can be monetary, but in some cases we can prohibit as well. And that might be even worse than a financial sanction in some cases. And if you're a small organization who's using a cloud-based AI service, then there are 2 points of attack vector for regulation, if you want to speak to it in those terms. And liability arises for both parties in those questions. And there are difficult legal challenges there about working out who's responsible for what and who did what, when, and how. So bringing it to the C-suite is very important. Thinking about it from the very beginning is vitally important. And also in terms of the research that IBM are doing, trying to understand what these effects are, sometimes intangible, the human aspects of those things, and where they lead to in people's lives, are in in transfer models in AI. If you take one piece of AI research and you apply it in a different context, things can go horribly wrong. There might be good outcomes a lot of the time, but there can be terrible impacts as well, we see. So the hype does need some reflection, I think. And I think when you start out on an AI project, you do need to talk to your social scientists, you do need to talk to your psychologists, you need to talk to the engineering teams, the legal teams. All those people need to be involved, and the executives, because if something's going to be of value, and AI projects are hugely expensive, generally speaking, you don't want to make a decision lightly, and you need to be sure of what you're aiming at and what your problem space is and what your outcomes are going to be. So that's a big difference in AI than as opposed to small based data processing done at an SME level, but it can have an impact on many SMEs as well.
I think that's a great conclusion, I think, for the session from all four of you, because you've really touched on a number of key issues there, both in what is shaping this area, how it's being shaped over time, and what you're looking at into the future a bit. Thank you so much for sharing your views and your expertise today. And I know I have plenty to take away from this session myself to think about. And for our audience, thank you for joining us for today's discussion. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Hi. Another great discussion, right? So a big thank you to you, Colin, and also a big thank you to our distinguished experts. Privacy has been a strategic research area for our lab. And I would say the Data Protection Toolkit, DPT, is one of our many accomplishments in this area. So now, as you heard the experts, and also you probably also learned yourself, that AI has become pervasive. We also expanded the scope of our privacy work to cover the life cycle of data throughout the AI development, not just focused on the data, but really the life cycle of the AI development. And so the insights we learned today from these experts are extremely important, because as we design and shape and plan for the next phase of the privacy work, we're going to use their insights and get the guidance. So it's very, very helpful, very timely topic again. All right, so we covered all three topics for our colloquium. But before we close the colloquium, let me share with you the voice from our lab and what they think the future would look like. So let's take a look.
I want to highlight just 3 challenges where I see significant opportunity for profound impact. The first is, how can we incorporate AI and human decision-making together? So-called human-in-the-loop AI, so that AI can learn and improve from human interactions. The next is, how can we show stakeholders that AI algorithms are demonstrably fair and equitable, especially in areas such as healthcare, when we are often at our most vulnerable? And finally, what's the role of technologies such as data privacy in ensuring that data collected about us is used to improve outcomes in our life and not for unintended purposes such as profit or surveillance?
The next 10 years will be all about making AI secure, robust, and privacy-preserving as a fundamental requirement for trustworthy AI that makes ethical and accurate decisions everywhere and every time.
For the next 5 to 10 years, I think more and more industry AI products and solutions powered by big models and massive datasets will greatly enhance our day-to-day life. At the same time, as researchers, we are going to explore different solutions to address various issues in this big model era.
I think that during the next 5 years, we'll see deeper integration of control techniques into the very fabric of popular AI tools.
We want our research to help societies use AI to learn from complex big data for public good. By harnessing the various types of data at population level, we can find ways to help drive change at the individual level.
I look forward to seeing what's next at DRL. I hope we can continue to bring great science to bear on IBM's business and create impact while maintaining the unique culture that we have in the lab.
I think we will continue seeing many exciting advances in AI over the next 10 years. I'm particularly interested in the advances we're making in autonomous systems. And this is not just with self-driving cars, but also with robots, which can see, understand, and interact with both humans and complex environments.
I believe that in the next 10 years, AIs will be collaborative distributed systems that can reason on the data and clearly explain the result and the decision processes that led to these results, so that we can build reliable AIs that we can trust.
Progress in AI will need to address automation in data collection and processing, as well as automated labs and experiments. The challenge will be doing this from edge to exascale, including quantum computing and hybrid cloud.
Well, I think the main force accelerating discoveries in the future will be computer systems that act as unbiased observers of discovery projects, recording all the actions taken, methods used, and outcomes generated.
Teaching the machine how to acquire and reason over the knowledge from reading books or any kinds of text data is the fundamental and open AI problem that can be solved at the Dublin Research Lab in the next 5 or 10 years.
I believe that our research will help to build technologies that can fully reflect human intelligence, but will also take into account human factors such as being able to explain itself, making fair decisions, and being comprehensible. These will at the end provide humans safe, efficient, healthy, and reliable technologies.
I think in 5 years, we'll have made the advances in quantum hardware, optimized quantum circuits, and quantum development tools. We'll be able to explore potential quantum advantage for computationally really hard problems arising in industries such as finance, logistics, AI, and many others.
In the future, we need to automate AI in the IT space at large scale to approach challenges like climate change and make factories and buildings more productive and energy efficient. Therefore, we need to exploit the existing domain knowledge and combine that with AI approaches in form of digital twins that are able to explain and optimize behavior of the systems.
The future looks bright for security and privacy research. The momentum initiated by legislations like GDPR and CCPA is pushing researchers to envision more ethical ways for extracting insights from the data. This leads more companies willing to adopt privacy-preserving solutions, therefore they need to develop new tools and analytics.
I think in the next 10 years we'll realise we've really excelled at getting machines to achieve a given objective. The real hurdle now is going to be to make sure that we've given them the right one. We need to put humans as first-class citizens in any AI solution in order to make sure the user, designer, and machine are on the same page when communicating what we want our AI solutions to do.
All right, so now you have learned a little bit about our history and also some of the work we're doing. And you heard the views, the visions, the concerns from the experts. So now it's time for the closing session where we're going to have an outlook into the future. So with great delight, I'd like to welcome Provost Linda Doyle, joining us from Trinity. So hi, Linda. Thanks for joining us. So we're at the closing session, and we're going to look into the future. So you can't really talk about the future without talking about talent. So in order to attract, develop, and retain talent for Ireland's ever-growing ecosystem, it requires the collaboration among universities, businesses, and government. So IBM has always been and will continue to invest in talent. So with greatest excitement, I'd like to jointly announce the IBM Trinity Pre-Doc Fellowship Program with Provost Linda Doyle. And so before we get into the details about the Pre-Doc program, I'd like to introduce Provost Linda Doyle, who may not need much of an introduction, but I'd like to say a few words. Dr. Doyle is an expert and a world-class researcher in networks and telecommunications. She is a strong leader. And most recently, she has become the first woman provost in Trinity's 429 years. So, Linda, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate you. You made history. You made all of us proud. So let's give Provost Linda Doyle a round of applause. So Linda, would you please share a few words about this historical appointment?
So thank you so much, Rui. And can I start by saying congratulations and happy birthday on the 10th anniversary. It's a huge achievement. Can I ask, are you hearing an echo there?
We're actually fine. I don't hear echo. I think the people in the room also, you don't hear no echo. Yeah, people are saying no echo. We're fine. We can hear you well.
I think it might be echoing back here in me a little bit. Oh, it's okay now. Mm-hmm. So I have to say I was hugely delighted to become Provost of Trinity. And I suppose I'm more delighted to say I'm joining people like Kirsten May from the University of Limerick, Eva Leinen from Maynooth University as president, and Maggie Cusack, who's the president of the Munster Technical University. And I mention these because I think it's a real sign of a changing landscape in the country. And I think it's important to note that. For people who may not know, the Provost in Trinity, it's an election process that you have to go through to become Provost. And it was a very interesting process. But one of the things that I remember saying on the day of the election was that I was hugely thrilled to have the role, but I look forward to a day when we don't have to mention that it's unusual for a woman to be in the role. And I think this is really, really important that we get to a point, and when I look at you, and you're a very inspiring leader yourself, I think it's really, really important that we don't notice this anymore, and we really, I think, have advanced when that gets to be the case. As you mentioned already, I come from a technical background, and I think one of the fantastic things about working in the technical world is the fact that I think all of us, we focus on the solution. We want to find the best way to do things, and you don't tend to focus on who does it. And I think that's a really, really great way to be. I have to say, I love the role so far. I only started on the 1st of August. It's hugely exciting. It's hugely challenging. And coming back after COVID, I think, is something that all of us are still kind of working our way through. But one of the things that makes it most challenging is the fact I'm surrounded by people, students and staff, who are constantly questioning and constantly pushing back about things. And I say this because I think this is indicative of the passion that you see in an academic environment where people really care about things, and whether they're pushing back and thinking big about the future of the planet and wanting Trinity to do better in terms of biodiversity and climate change, or whether about their own research and how that can be better done in an organisation. I think it's indicative of the way people think and what matters to them, and therefore it comes as no surprise to me that an organisation like Trinity wants to couple with an organisation like IBM, where those very passionate people who want to make a difference and change the future want to come together. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I think back to you for the moment.
Well, thank you, Linda. Very inspiring, such a good role model. Also well said in terms of the partnership between IBM and also Trinity. So now let me spend a few minutes in talking about the joint program, right? And so IBM and Trinity, we have a long history of partnership and also collaboration. And the intention of this pre-doc program is to attract, to develop, and to retain the top talent for Island's ecosystem. And so what we do is we select the top students and who has been exemplary in the academic achievements. And the students have to go through a very rigorous interview process. And then once they're selected, they'll be enrolled in Trinity as a PhD student. At the same time, they will be hired by IBM as full-time employee under the category of pre-doc students. So the duration of employment with IBM is the duration of their PhD studies. So each student will be co-supervised by a professor from Trinity and also a mentor from IBM Research. Now, the projects, right? So the project the students will be working on will be co-defined by the professor and also IBM. So these projects will be aligned strategically with the focus areas of both Trinity and also IBM. So to ensure a top quality program, we have set very strict criteria for IBM researchers to become a mentor. We also set very high bar, milestones, requirements for the students. Of course, this is brand new. We just got started. So I'm sure along the way, we're going to learn new things, make improvements, and also expand. So Linda, would you please share from your perspective about this pre-doc program?
I'm delighted to. So maybe just as a precursor, I've always been fascinated about the way IBM does business. And I don't know whether I said it to you before, Rui, but two heroes of mine, nothing to do with engineering, are designers Ray and Charles Eames. And one of the things that I thought was amazing was back in the 1950s that IBM had the foresight to engage with these designers and do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And to me, IBM is a company that is about kind of trying new things and doing different things all of the time. So, that history and where you are today, to me, kind of matters to us in Trinity. And creating a deeper relationship with people who kind of want to push the boundaries and challenge things and, help design the future is really, really important. So I come from a background myself where I was lucky enough to be director of an SFI research centre called Connect. And as part of that, I had the opportunity to work very closely with industry at times. And I think it gives you a fantastic view, and perspective that you don't get by just working in an academic space just on its own. And I would say, sometimes people debate about the pros and cons of working closely with industry. And I would say myself that some of the most disruptive research I did was research I did with working with the company, because oftentimes through close collaboration and actually through the problem being somewhat real, it makes it harder, actually, rather than easier. So I think it's an amazing opportunity. I think one of the key things I learned, and what makes me think that your pre-doc program is fantastic, is that a huge amount of it is about the right relationship. And I love the way you describe it, where it has to be right for the PI and it has to be right for the person in IBM, and they have to come together on the right project. Because when you get that to happen, I think you can get really magical things to happen. So I have to say, and I applaud you in the way you are thinking about that, and the way you are forging relationships with us. And all I can say is I think that there'll be great things ahead. The talent is really, really important. And I think this kind of a program is so high profile. It really allows us to attract national and international talent, the very best talent that you speak about. And from our perspective in Trinity, we are delighted that you are interacting with us on a number of key topics. So I think you've mentioned them already, but quantum computing and quantum systems, artificial intelligence, high performance computing, security and privacy. And as you could see from the panels earlier, these are such critical topics. I'm very proud of the PIs on our side. We have John Gould, Ivana Dusparik, Declan O'Sullivan and Sinead Ryan. John is from physics, Ivana is from computer science and statistics, as is Declan O'Sullivan, and Sinead Ryan is from pure and applied maths, and she's head of school there as well. And I think what this also speaks to, and which I love, is the interdisciplinarity of it, that there's different discipline backgrounds coming together to work with you. So I know this is a pilot. I can already say I think it's a brilliant idea, and I absolutely look forward to a deeper relationship, to seeing how these go, to seeing the great research that comes out of it and doing much more together. And we very much thank you for working so closely with us and for having such a fantastic pre-doc program.
Yes, thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. Yes, I am confident that this joint pre-doc fellowship program will not only deepen, but also broaden our partnership between IBM, which is the most prominent industry research lab in the world, and also Trinity, which is the highest ranked university in Ireland. So together, we're going to elevate the innovation ecosystem in Ireland. At the same time, also build a pipeline for talent for our lab. So very excited about it. And so now let me introduce our very first pre-doc student, Nathan Keenan. So Nathan, please come onto the stage.
Hi, I'm Nathan. Thank you for inviting me up.
How are you doing today? You look
Not
a
too
big
bad.
smile on your face.
Yeah, I know.
Very happy, right?
Second time seeing the campus, so it's nice to see a bit more people around this time. The
Of
first time it was
course,
the ghost
yes,
town.
exactly. We just opened the last week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Nathan graduated from Maynooth University with exceptional academic track record. And now he's a PhD student in physics department at Trinity. So congratulations, Nathan.
Thank you.
So can you share with us, what does this mean to you, being the first pre-doc student?
I mean, so this summer I was finishing my master's thesis in Maynooth, and I'm sure everyone experiences it who's graduating, but I think particularly in maths, if you're not kind of sticking in academia, it's not very well defined what to do. And then I think randomly coming across this opportunity, and I was talking to Martin, who's the supervisor on IBM's part for a bit, and he kind of talked to me about this opportunity. I was thinking you're, I guess, 4 years PhD, so you get to continue in academia, and then also 4 years working with the industry leader in the area. So I was thrilled. I mean, I still had to go through interviews at the time and get through all that, but yeah, the opportunity is amazing. Yeah, it does mean a lot.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And so, as you know, go through a PhD program is a long journey. So, what are your goals, and what would you like to achieve? Take advantage of the best of the world, as Linda said, right? Industry lab and also the best school in Ireland. So, what are your goals, and what are your plans?
I guess so. My current project, I'm looking at. So, I guess the project in general is we have quantum devices. I mean, IBM, obviously. But the kind of main problem is they're quite noisy and hard to use. So I guess one of the things, you can wait for the devices to get better, or you can also work on optimizing how you run programs on the devices. So in particular, I'm looking at quantum simulation and how to simulate quantum magnets pretty well on these machines, or better than before anyway. So I guess my first goal is to improve current results. I'm kind of naively running on the quantum machines. And then from there, I want to continue with optimization and these kind of new machine learning methods for running stuff on quantum devices, and hopefully contribute meaningful stuff to Qiskit and the kind of IBM technologies in general.
I see. I know you have a very strong background in math. So then tell me why you pick quantum versus other field.
So I did my undergraduate in Maynooth University, as you said. They have this kind of double honors path where you take both maths and theoretical physics. I guess the theoretical physics department there is amazing. From the get-go, I was kind of encouraged to take on research projects and kind of work with, not a supervisor per se, because I was an undergraduate, but just throughout the years, just try different things with some overview. My supervisor during my undergraduate became my supervisor for my research master's, and he's very involved in quantum systems and the likes. So I think it was a very obvious kind of jump into quantum computing and kind of related areas from there.
That's great. So any advice you may have for other people who are applying for the pre-doc program? Because as I mentioned, you also went through experience yourself. It's a very rigorous interview process, right? And you're selected. Yeah. So share your secrets and also share your experience.
So I guess the interview process, so I was actually on holidays at the time when it was arranged. And I think over the course of the day, it was from 9 a.m. to 12 or 1. And there were multiple interviews. Some were 2-on-1, some were 1-on-1. I prepared a presentation for everyone attending on my past research and everything. So I guess just being prepared on talking about what you've done and why you're interested in this specific role. I mean, the kind of however many hours it was flew by anyway, because everyone is so interested in talking back and forth. But yeah, no, it was a great experience. I was nervous always the weeks coming up to it, but no, it went very well. And
okay,
yeah,
that's great. And so great to have you here, and also thank you so much for sharing your experience. And best luck to you. And Linda, do you have any expectations and a special message for Nathan and other future pre-doc students? We do have other ones coming on board soon. And so any advice from you, Linda?
So first of all, I just want to say congratulations, Nathan. I'm delighted you're here with us in Trinity and in such a fantastic school of physics and with working with people like John Gould. So you're very, very welcome, and it's brilliant that you are the first. And I suppose there's a lot of weight on your shoulders with that. I think, you know, Rui, you touched on it yourself earlier. I mean, my expectations, I suppose, are the expectations. I think you have this unique opportunity to span academia and industry. And I think the challenge is to make the most of both of those things and, you know, to use, I suppose, the learning and the language from both of those sides to push the other. So I think, you know, I think in academia you can be set in a particular way, in industry you can be set in a different way, and I think the challenge for you is to make the whole better than the sum of the parts, really, and push beyond. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to be able to say that you know, can do a PhD with the luxury of working in a company like IBM as well there. And I suppose the other piece of advice, just to report back to us all and let us know how you're doing so that we can really understand what's working and what's not working. Don't ever be afraid to say what's not working, because we're here, I suppose, setting out on the start of a journey, you know, to I suppose to deepen this relationship with IBM and to do great things.
Linda, and also best wishes and good luck with the pre-doc program. Yeah.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you very much.
So, as I shared with you earlier, that we're going to have special speakers for the session today. And so it is my huge privilege to welcome Minister Simon Harris and TD Minister for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation, and Science onto the podium here. Thank you so much for joining us, Minister Harris. And you often say, you know, often hear you emphasize the critical importance of investing in science and in innovation, right? And also, you also said the beauty of the island ecosystem is collaboration. Your messages resonate with us so well. So as we plan for our next 10 years, it's critically important for us to hear your view and your vision. So we're very, very grateful to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you so much, and I'm really delighted to be here today, delighted to be here with IBM, and delighted to be here for what is a moment, I suppose, of celebration, a major milestone for your company, a major milestone for this research lab in marking your 10th anniversary. And I really want to begin by saying thank you. I want to thank IBM for its ongoing commitment to Ireland. I want to thank it for its ongoing collaboration, as you say, with Ireland as well, with government and with our research ecosystem. IBM, of course, is the longest established IT multinational in Ireland, and we should never forget that. Your history going right back to the 50s and all of the transformation and all of the change that we have seen here in Ireland, in the European Union, and across the globe since then. As you'll all be aware, and I think this becomes truer by the day, research, development and innovation plays such a key role in our economy, in our society, and it's absolutely clear that investing in research not only enhances existing operations and employment, but it also paves the way for future investment and for job creation here in Ireland also. Everybody here present this afternoon and those who've joined you online, you're all important stakeholders in the Irish research and innovation ecosystem. And I think one of the benefits perhaps of a relatively small country in terms of population is we can have quite a close-knit ecosystem, and we can have an ecosystem that truly is collaborative, that is agile, that is flexible, and that is able to respond to the needs of the time. And I think another thing we all have in common is we all share an ambition to strengthen that ecosystem. So as we're here today, celebrating 10 years of the IBM Research Lab, I would pose the question to all of us, what does the next 10 years look like? And how do we wish to collaborate on that journey as well? Of course, government has a very specific role in relation to research. It's about trying to create the right environment, the right support structures, the favourable conditions, if you like, within which ideas, research, enterprise, entrepreneurship and innovation can flourish. and where quality employment opportunities can also be created and maintained. And over the past 20 years, I think it's fair to say, here in Ireland, we have developed together a world-class research and innovation system, albeit from a very low base, and the contribution that that has made to enterprise in Ireland cannot be understated. Our research and innovation systems have expanded. They've also consolidated, with investment growing substantially over that time. And just to give you some figures, when you first opened the doors of this lab in 2011, overall investment in research and development in Ireland, that's both from public and private sources, was 2.6 billion euro. In 2019, the last year for which I have full figures, that was 4.4 billion, a rise of 70%. So even from a level of investment point of view, we are in such a different place at the end of the 10 years of this lab than we were at the beginning. But of course, we say that in the full knowledge, context and awareness that we have an awful lot more that we need to do. There is a growing and ongoing debate in the world, and indeed a lot of progress around global taxation, and we certainly won't get into that at whatever time of the day we are, and now on a Wednesday afternoon. But I would make one comment. It will make investment in talent, in ingenuity, in research, in innovation, all the more important. The future economic and social well-being of any country, and I believe of any company, will be about investing in people, in talent, in research and in new ideas. And our research and innovation system is a really critical platform on which Ireland's development is now dependent. And I do believe it is a strategic national asset. It needs to be seen as such. Research isn't something that's nice to do. It's now a core component of your business, but a core component of the government's agenda from an economic point of view as well. And we, of course, know, and I'm conscious here in IBM, that we know investment in research can help attract foreign direct investment. It can help generate new ideas, technology, skills, knowledge and solutions, which have proven to be transformative in our prosperity and, of course, in the way we work and the way we live. And we've all seen that in a very accelerated way during the course of the global pandemic. Major multinational companies such as IBM have continually embraced innovation in your own work. You've transformed your operations here in Ireland, and you've done so in order to remain internationally competitive. And I'm conscious of that family and that network in which IBM Ireland exists as well. A key element of our own foreign direct investment agenda is increasing the attractiveness and the appeal of Ireland as a place to invest and a place to grow once a company has established itself here. And I'm delighted to say that 1/3 of IDA client companies have now been in Ireland for 20 years or more. And I really want to thank the IDA for being able to impart that statistic, because it says an awful lot about the work that they do in terms of the relationships that they build and embed with companies who decide to invest here in Ireland. But the system, of course, does need to pursue collaboration at all levels of company size and company development. And critical to this is national level collaboration of relevant agencies to bring our multinational companies, our SMEs and our research performing bodies together to build a small number of sectoral areas of research excellence. And I do think that linkage, in terms of what the next number of years might look like, is a really, really key point. We need to get better, much better, at getting our multinational companies, our small Indigenous Irish companies, our higher education institutions, the government and its agencies, collaborating and working together on research and on preparing for the future. And we're not starting from zero in that regard, because through initiatives like the Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund and Horizon 2020, I think we now have vehicles in place to help bring about and foster that collaboration. And indeed, IBM has shown a real eagerness to collaborate with our R&I system here in Ireland. And I just look at some of the figures, 20 million euro in funding from Horizon 2020 for IBM Ireland, over 38 projects involved as well. And Ireland is now on course to meet its 1.25 billion euro target from Horizon 2020. And that's very much thanks to the role that companies like IBM have played in that success. And I want to acknowledge that here today as well. We're fortunate in Ireland that the importance of innovation is very well understood by our business community. The importance of increased collaboration within industry and between industry and academia is clear. And I think that's where my new department might be able to help. If we were having this conversation 18 months ago, we had a Department of Education over here, and we had a Department of Business over here. We now have in the middle a standalone department of further and higher education, research, innovation and science. And yes, that's a long name, and it takes a long time to go through each of the elements, but the purpose is very simple. It's a department for the future. It's a department that recognises if you can bring together the education system with some of the functions that were previously in an enterprise or business department and fuse them, you can genuinely create a powerhouse for the future economic and social well-being of our country. And I'm encouraged already, and indeed I was delighted on my arrival to see the Provost of Trinity here on the screen. I'm encouraged already at the level of that collaboration that is indeed underway, and indeed some of the announcements that you're making today in terms of how you wish to do more in that regard as well. I really do want to, on that note, I'm delighted to hear about the new IBM and Trinity College Dublin pre-doc fellowship programme. We can talk a lot about collaboration, we can talk a lot about working together. You're doing it. And we need to see an awful lot more of this, and anything that I can do to support and foster that, I'll be only too delighted to do, because it is through collaborative programmes that we will strengthen Ireland's ecosystem, our research and innovation ecosystem, and strengthen those links between academia, industry and government as well. So I really want to conclude by thanking IBM, thanking you for the work that you've done in our country since the 50s. Thank you for the vote of confidence that you continue to show in our country, and specifically today in your research lab, to thank you for the last 10 years, and to say to you as you embark on the next stage of your journey, we look forward to working with you in partnership in relation to that. Later this year, we will launch our new National Research and Innovation Strategy, and key to that will be partnership and collaboration between industry, academia and government. And I'm excited about the journey ahead, excited about the potential, and excited about that ongoing partnership we'll continue to have with IBM. So happy 10th birthday, and I look forward to the next 10 years. Gurmila Magov.
Thank you so much, Minister Harris, and for being with us on this very special day. And so you have our unwavering commitment to continuing invest in research and innovation, also continue to invest in talent. So you just heard about the pre-doc program with Trinity. I'd like to let you know that we're also working closely with UCD, both parties with the intention to open the next pre-doc program. So more news coming, and stay tuned. Yeah. Okay, so next, with my great pleasure, I'd like to welcome Dr. Alessandro Curiani. So sorry, I supposed to be able to say right away, but it is true. I haven't seen you for so long. Very excited to see you. So may I have you come onto the stage?
Thank you, Roy.
So yeah, Dr. Alessandro Curiani is an IBM Fellow and a VP for IBM Research Europe and Africa. And so, I still remember last March, you were supposed to make a trip to Dublin and only canceled the very last minute for obvious reasons. And I still remember Alessandro was very optimistic, say, don't worry, I'll be there in a few weeks, right? So now it's about 20-something months. We're so happy to have you here in person, and so happy our campus was finally open last week, just in time for us to celebrate. And so great to have you to deliver the closing keynote for this very important event for us. Okay.
Thank you very much, Roy. And being a researcher, right, as a DNA, I need to be optimistic. But the important thing is that it was not only a few weeks, right, or 18 months, but the important thing is that we are here together, face to face, to celebrate this 10th anniversary of this lab. And that is the reason why I'm very, very honored to be here, but also very proud, honored to represent IBM Research and all of you, right, during this anniversary, but also very proud for the step forward that we have done together, indeed myself in the last 6 years, to bring this lab to where it is today. Let me start thanking Minister Harris, Kiron Shovega, and Donald Travers to be here with us today. I do believe that this is a sign of the value that together we have created in the past and we are going to create in the future. And look, anniversary are a very good opportunities to do two things. One, to look back and celebrate achievements. And then, starting from that, right, look at the future. what else we are going to do. And if you think about IBM research, we do have more than 3,000 researchers distributed across the world with one goal, and the goal is really to do the transformational innovation that is at the base of our company, okay? And this is translating a mission for us as IBM Research to be the organic engine of growth for the company, and to define the future of computing for the business and the society. On top of it, each of our global labs, like Dublin is to interact in the most synergistically possible way with the local innovation ecosystem, okay? So if you think about these 3 missions that we do have, let's go back and think about this lab. You have seen some of the results today, outstanding results, but organic engine or organic innovation for IBM. Some of the key product and feature innovation that IBM is putting on the market today in the fields of AI application, how to infuse AI in the industry, in the fields of healthcare and in the field of security, came out from this lab. Thinking about defining the future of computing, you do know that in IBM research, we do believe that the future of computing is the convergence and synergy between hybrid cloud, high performance computing, AI, artificial intelligence, and quantum. You know, all these 3 things coming together to accelerate the scientific discovery, and accelerating the scientific discovery, trying to solve some of the most important problems of the society. Dublin has been engaged since the first day in this mission, and this part of on this mission moving forward. Then look about interacting with the local innovation ecosystem. You know, we started with some collaboration with industry university. We expanded this in 2019. This team co-created this Quantum Innovation Center that is going to be an important piece of the innovation agenda for the lab and eventually also the country. And, you know, just announced these additional programs for pre-doc with 2 of the most important universities in the country. You know, there is a trend and there is a dynamics that we want to continue. And by the way, thank you very much to Ireland and to the Irish government exactly to set up an environment that allow, and I hope is going to allow even more in the future, to have this synergistic interaction that is win-win. So that said, you know, this is why I am very, very proud about being here and about this lab, you know, looking at the metric. So now, looking a little bit on the future, I do believe that exactly what I just said today, and looking how the company and IBM is going to develop in the future, this lab has already and will have something to say more and more, especially, you know, in the full area of AI, quantum, its convergence, and as I was telling you before, it's used to try to solve some of the problems in business and in society. So I close here to really wishing you a happy anniversary, thanking all of you for the work done so far, and you know, the future, the next 10 years, you can bet that IBM is going to continue to invest in this ecosystem. Is a very positive ecosystem for us, and you know, this is only the start of impact of this lab. I want to close with a last point. You know, this has been possible because not because of me, because of, you know, many other things, but mostly because of people. Each of you, each of the researchers that participated, you know, to build up this lab, but also thank you to the leadership that has been here in Ireland. And I want only to remember a few names, right? Starting with Lisa Amini, then Eleni Prazzini, Wendy Belluomini, and then Ruoi Zhu. Now, you know what is there is one, categorization that, it's common in all the names that I've done. They were really outstanding women leaders. So I thank all of them, and I thank also Roy, for the organization of this event, everybody that have helped, and thank you very much, and look for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Okay, Alessandro, on behalf of our team, we'd like to thank you for your strong leadership, for your support, and for your guidance, especially during the pandemic. Our team weathered through the crisis well. So a big thank you to our distinguished speakers, honored guests, and also all attendees. So together, let's build a better, stronger, and brighter future. But before we adjourn, I'd like to draw your attention to another exciting event, which is a part of our anniversary celebration. That's Ireland's first quantum consortium. They're going to have a panel. And so it's on November 18th, and it'll be hosted UCD. It's an in-person event, but will be lively streamed through IBM Research YouTube. So more information will be available on our website. So I invite all of you to either sign up for physical attendance or you can join online. With that, I'd like to thank you again. Stay well, stay safe, and goodbye. See you soon.